metadatas. I test metadatas.
All right.
What does it look like? Okay, ask if people can hear. Okay. That should work. Okay. Hey everybody, how's it going? Sorry about that, guys. I don't know if this is going to be working. We're going to see. It should be a lot better. The internet is looking better. I'm just going to talk for a couple seconds to see if it starts connecting for you guys. Hopefully we're not getting too much buffering or anything like that. I had to recycle the internet connection. It just wasn't working on our end for streaming. Our internet was fine for uploading, but it was good. If somebody's saying we're getting a robot voice, can you maybe turn your volume up just a little bit to see if we're getting a robot voice? Hopefully we're not getting too much buffering or anything like that. Okay. No, it sounds fine. The voice seems fine. I mean, it's streaming, so the audio quality can sometimes be a little bit lower. I'm just going to angle the camera a little bit better so that we get Brianna in the picture. More beauty, less beast in that regard. What? That's cute. Okay. Okay, so sorry about that, guys. Very much apologize for the late start. I think we actually got a super chat from Samantha.
Yeah. So
maybe we'll start with that.
You don't want to do an opening?
Well, yeah, sorry. I should do an opening. So, guys, thanks for coming by. Sorry for the technical difficulties there. But we're doing our weekly live stream for those who are new to the channel every Wednesday night at 8 p.m., give or take a few minutes for technical difficulties. We do a live stream. So I'm glad to have everybody here. We could talk about anything. Largely, we do a Q&A type session. You know, people have questions about what's happening in politics over the past week. People have questions about broader political or philosophical issues. People have questions about pop culture, whatever. Happy to answer them and give our takes. You know, some things that are happening, we could talk about the DNC and Bernie. As we know, Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the Democratic primary, or more accurately, has suspended his race in the primary and, you know, wanted to continue on in the race and fight for every delegate because he knew that at the convention, when it came to policy setting, you need a certain amount of delegates to have clout. Bernie wanted to make sure, I think he needed 25-30% of the delegates to have a meaningful impact. And he wanted to get there. And now we're at a situation where he might not get to do that because New York State might be removing him from the ballot even though he wants to remain on it. That's something that we have to keep an eye on. I believe they're making the decision sometime today. I haven't seen them make the decision yet. Maybe they'll try to do it on the cover of night, but that's something to keep an eye out for. Another thing we could talk about is Carolyn Goodman. If you didn't see, I put out a video on it analyzing her appearance on Anderson Cooper and just the general trend of like these bonkers, you know, anti-stay-at-home protests, these bonkers anti-social distancing protests. Because I get that like some people are desperate, especially in the US, because $1,200 is not enough to survive on. Like the nature of these protests is blowing our mind. And I don't want to speak for Brianna 100%, but she's no, just like, she's like, my God, are these people for real? Like they're all getting it. And they're like, and so we could talk about her. We could talk about the guy who had the sign up, or I believe it might have been a woman, but the person who had a sign up saying, you know, sacrifice the weak, reopen Tennessee. We could certainly talk about that. We can also speak about the Canadian aid program. It's been made better in a sense, but not much so, right? It's basically been improved in that students will get something, but students are still being treated inferiorly, and part of their aid package requires them to basically go out and volunteer for it, where, you know, quote-unquote regular adults who get benefits, you don't have to do any sort of proof of work to earn that money. And I think it's just another way of like the liberals and their means testing and the perception that there are some people that just don't deserve actual help. Like they'll get like the opportunity to work for money, but they won't get help. That's really plaguing this government. And within that, we could talk about how, you know, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have really been pushing for stronger and better benefits, much like Bernie in the States has, where they want everyone to get the $2,000 a month. They want to ensure that working class people are taken care of. They want to ensure that the wage subsidy is more stringently connected to ensuring that workers are paid and not just, profits pocketed. And one crucial thing in Canada that you're seeing in the States, but in Canada it's less extreme but still important, is that a lot of Canadians depend on health insurance, at their job. It's not for your basic doctor's visits or hospital stays, but through Brianna's job, myself and her and our family, we get dental benefits and we get pharmaceutical benefits. In Canada, most of the time at least, those aren't provided. If your job doesn't have dental benefits, any dentist work you need, you have to pay for it out of pocket. And so a lot of Canadians right now are losing their dental coverage and they're losing their medicine coverage, and it's really a big issue. And so, much like how Medicare for All has sort of grown in popularity because of the crisis, calls for pharmacare and dental care have increased in Canada as well, and that's something to definitely keep our eyes on. So those are some things we can talk about. Again, apologies for the bit of the delayed start, but I'm glad to see folks stream in still. It's great to see.
Okay, switch the
yeah, for sure.
super chats.
So I don't know if they're going to all come in.
Oh, I need to find Samantha's.
Yeah, they might only come in after a certain point. Maybe I can also.
Oh no, I lost Samantha's because we had to start over.
It is still here. Let me reload and see if I can pull it up. I'm gonna reload this thing and see if view archive. Yeah, there it is, right there. I just had to reload the thing.
Okay,
yeah.
So first super chat from Samantha Sider. Thanks so much for your support. They say, is there anyone in Canadian politics as crazy as the sacrifice the week reopen Tennessee protester?
Well, Samantha, to my knowledge, not quite. But the thing about that protester is that I think there's a lot of people like them. They're just not taking the mask off, right? They're not, and I don't mean N95s. I mean that metaphorical mask where you hide your actual viewpoints because that politically they're unpalatable, right? And so a lot of people have been saying have wanted to say what that person's sign said, but didn't have the guts to do it. Here in Canada, there's been a few conservative MPs. There's been a few conservative figures that have sort of argued that because the people that are passing away and are more likely to suffer from the illness are elderly folks, and specifically elderly folks in care homes, in long-term care facilities, which is what we've seen in Canada, where a majority of people who have been passing away have been clustered in a few care homes in Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia. For a while in Canada, we only had a few people that passed away, and they were almost all from one care home in British Columbia. And so he argued, well, I guess we just don't have to worry because we can just isolate these people. So it wasn't necessarily sacrifice the weak, but it was sort of the only people that are passing away are old folks, and they're already clustered away in their homes. What's the big deal? When we know, of course, that, you can certainly, have security measures at these places in particular, but that viewpoint will almost certainly lead to more people getting it, including those folks not in care homes, but it will inevitably affect care homes as well. So in terms of mainstream politicians in Canada, no one has been quite that bad, but you have seen a few conservatives take a pretty ugly turn. The ugliness in Canada is actually very similar to what Joe Biden is saying, which is basically trying to blame China. Biden is trying to use xenophobia to attack Donald Trump with regards to COVID. Damn it. With regards to the thing that I'm not supposed to mention. Sometimes you get flagged now, sometimes you don't. So I'm just not gonna try to mention the thing. But here in Canada, the Conservatives have basically, everything's been about when is Justin Trudeau going to blame China harder? And it's such a distraction. But in general, we've been better. We've been better than Dan Patrick or the Las Vegas mayor or some of the protesters we've seen. Although there have been some Canadians on the right that have started to make similar calls to like Trumpists in the States. They just don't have the same amount of numbers.
Okay, so another super...
No, sorry.
You're so clicky.
Sorry.
Stop. Okay, another super chat, John Barlich, and they say, hey, what is your opinion on Trump cutting the World Health Organization?
I don't agree with it. Like, look, there's a place to be critical of the World Health Organization, like you would of any organization, because, you know, maybe they didn't do as good as they could. Maybe they weren't as good as at coordinating all the various regions of the world and governments of the world to have protocols. But I think in general, the primary failure wasn't WHO related. It was mostly on the individual countries. Like, China made mistakes. There's obviously room to criticize China. For instance, some of the doctors that initially brought up this illness were frankly arrested because they were besmirching China's honor by daring to suggest this was a big deal. And obviously that was a mistake. And the United States obviously failed. Even here in Canada, where our response has been seen as good, you had Ontario Premier, Canada's biggest province, tell people to go out internationally for March break when we all started to know this was really bad. And even Justin Trudeau lied, basically saying in the early days of the crisis, okay, it should be. Okay, are we back? Okay, we might be back. Okay, are we back? Are we back, guys? Okay, are we back? We might be back. Okay, let us know. Health insurance. You know. Okay, we back? Okay, somebody's like, you're back for now.
I know.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. That was definitely just our internet went out. Like, it was just because my stream program was cutting out. So we're just going to keep trying to go.
Yeah. And also, I literally lost all the comments before JC saying that I'm pretty for someone with orange hair. So if you commented above that, you're going to have to re-comment for Christo to get to it.
Yeah. Okay, and so I think we saw...
And thanks, JC, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're back. Everyone's like, we're back. Okay, good. Sorry about that, guys. Really, really apologize for that again.
Okay, so we were on the WHO question.
Okay, yeah. So just to recap, it, depending on how much you got, WHO is... like, they've made mistakes, but so has the Canadian government, the American government, the Chinese government, the Italian, the French, etc. Cutting aid to the WHO, cutting your funding to it at this point is, I think, stupid, frankly. And I also think it's just an effort to distract from his own failures. So Trump can say the WHO's at fault, and you know, that's why I'm cutting funding. They're a bad organization. So that when people rightfully say, hey, Mr. Trump, what could you have done better? And he said, well, I can't do anything better. China lied. The WHO lied. I think it's a distraction, personally.
What's the address the King of the Hill question? I think we might have lost that.
Craig, yeah.
But now I really want to know.
Yeah, rephrase that one, the previous King of the Hill question.
Okay, we have another super chat.
Oh, our provider's Kojiko. Sorry, that's not good advertisement for Kojiko.
Maybe not after tonight.
No.
Okay, another super chat from Ben Riley. And they say, the reason I wanted you to talk to Vayush on voter shaming is because you're very educated and we're all kind of on edge and could use a good faith discussion with two large voices, even if you disagree. Yeah,
Ben, thanks for that. Yeah, and the reason I never said I wouldn't, it's just I don't watch Vaush. You said I'm a large creator. That's very, very generous. Vaush is a large creator. I'm still a small fry. You know, I'd be happy to have discussions with people about like what the approach to this election is. I mean, there are a lot of people whose position is if you're not voting for Biden, you're a bad person because you are electing Donald Trump directly. Or there are some people that are like, if you're voting for Biden, no matter what, even if it's for harm reduction, you are a traitor to progressives and you're selling out the movement and you're hurting, all the people that Biden is leaving out and exploiting. And I sort of feel like, and maybe I'm a bit of a fence sitter, that the whole strategy shouldn't be about shaming one another, but just trying to articulate your position and then ultimately respecting what other elements of the progressive movement do or don't do. So for instance, if you're like, I want to vote for Joe Biden because I don't want Trump to be president, and even if he does a couple small things better than Trump, it's worth it. You can maybe articulate to them that, the Democratic Party ignores the left because the left is imprisoned by the party. The left has never systematically gone out and voted for the Greens to give the Greens like 10% and really shown the Democrats that it means business. And that person might disagree with you, but they're not inherently a bad person. And likewise, if you're a stop Trump at all costs person, you might go to a Bernie supporter and articulate that, hey, in a swing state, you should maybe vote for Biden. But then they could say, look, I want to vote for somebody that has my values. And maybe that's the Green Party, or maybe that's another independent, or I can't vote for somebody who did what Joe Biden did to Tara Reade. I can't do that. It's just something, I can't do that. And then that's fine. And I think that's the approach we need to have, is to recognize that people are going to approach this election in different ways. And what the left absolutely cannot do is allow Joe Biden, of all people, to divide us. Because there's down ballot races, there's 2024, there's social movements, there's labor unions, there's municipal politics, all of these things, right? And Bernie people should not be fighting right now about who they're going to vote for that's not Bernie. That's ridiculous. Have your position, take your position, disagree with people, but don't start, cutting people out of the movement based on their vote in this election that doesn't include Bernie Sanders. That's my viewpoint. That's my viewpoint. And I'd be happy to have that discussion with folks, going forward. Although, again, I'm a small fry compared to Vaush. I don't watch. I'm sure he has no clue who I am.
Maybe someone will tell him. Okay, Kathy Lewis, channel member, says there's an interesting intersection between MAID laws and the pandemic. Do you know what that is?
No.
No. Okay, Kathy, if you can let us know what MAID laws are.
Yeah, for sure. I'm interested. I'm intrigued now. It's a good question.
We will come back to your comment.
Yeah.
Okay, so another super chat came in from Alexander Watt, and they say, what is your opinion of current Ontario Liberal Party leader Steve Del Duca? I kind of want to say, who?
Yeah, well, Brianna's saying who, and Brianna and I are, we were delegates to the Ontario Provincial Council. So we are in Ontario politics, and Brianna didn't immediately know who you were talking about.
Well, I
know. But, he's not a well-known name, right? In one sense, he's not well-known, but in the other, he has a lot of negatives. As an NDP guy, I don't like Del Duca, but I think picking him as leader was a mistake for the Liberals for a few reasons. One, he's like a right-of-center guy, and he's a center-right guy or a centrist guy. He's on the right-ish element of his own party, put it that way. Kathleen Wynne is also center-right, but she was on the left center of her party. And so he's going to argue most likely that we need to be more moderate. I don't think that's going to work because those voters are locked in with Ford. They like Ford. The people that voted for Ford like Ford, at least most of them. And right now, even though I think it's BS, people think Ford's been doing a good job in Ontario. So I don't see a lot of Ford voters easily abandoning him at this stage. He's also too closely connected to Kathleen Wynne. The Kathleen Wynne government was thrown out just a couple of years ago, and he was a cabinet minister in that government. And so it's not like Justin Trudeau, who I'm also not a fan of, but when Trudeau became Liberal leader, it had been when he ran in 2015, it had basically been 9 years since the Liberals were in power. And when the Liberals were last in power, Trudeau wasn't even an MP. Trudeau only became an MP in 2008, I believe. So Trudeau could reasonably say, all the scandals of the Chrétien Martin years, those aren't mine. I own nothing of that. I wasn't even a backbencher. And so Del Duca's got a real issue of still being tarred and feathered with like all the negatives of the Wynne era. He is also like he doesn't tick any sort of like interesting box. Like they had Mitzi Hunter running, who would be like the first woman of color to lead a party in this province's history. I believe the first person of color maybe to lead a major party in this province. It would have been pretty historic. Del Duca's, like, people are trying to say, oh, he's the first Italian. Well, as a fellow Southern Mediterranean, I can say that it's not that big of a deal. But my view is really that he's going to struggle at differentiating himself from Kathleen Wynne, and he's going to struggle at trying to win back some of those NDP voters. Those liberal NDP swing voters that picked the NDP last time. The Liberals had somebody who could at least have the image of a progressive. They might go back. And a lot of the polling is inconclusive right now, but one of the things I've seen in poll after poll was that whenever the Liberals were polled as a blank slate, aka NDP with Horwath, Conservatives with Ford, Liberals with leader to be determined, the Liberals polled better with blank than with Del Duca. And when polling with Del Duca, more voters tend to leave the Liberals and go to the NDP a little bit. So as an NDP partisan, I think it's a good thing. So all in all, I don't think he's going to be that effective. And one of the limitations of the Liberal Party's approach is that they don't do one member, one vote. Ontario PCs and the Ontario NDP both do one member, one vote. The Conservatives have a weighting system, but the NDP doesn't. But in any case, every member of the party gets to vote. They get a ballot. The Liberals, you have to become a delegate to the convention and go. And so Del Duca, even though a lot of Liberals probably didn't like him, a lot of potential Liberal voters weren't excited, he was able to like run the party machine and basically win on the first ballot, even though I don't think that reflects the will of Ontario Liberals. And there was even a scandal that just recently came out that he basically like changed zoning laws so that he could like save his pool or something. Like
you
when
mean a pool like in your backyard?
Yeah, like it was, yeah. So like, and that was obviously from a couple years ago when he was in government, but it's like this guy from the start is already looking bad. And you could say one thing, I've heard nothing of Del Duca since his leadership election. And that was months ago now, a couple months ago at least. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't impress me much. He don't impress me much.
Is that supposed to be Shania Twain?
Yes.
Oh, you're a bad Canadian. Oh, that's embarrassing. Okay, Ben Riley, another super chat from Ben Riley, says Vahush is in the not voting. Sorry, Vahush is in the quote not voting Biden equal vote for Trump, and Kyle is voting equals free speech. Vahush says that Kyle's being irresponsible, so it's starting to get pretty bad, and I feel like we need a neutral voice.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen some of those debates,
well,
right?
You can moderate.
Yeah, I've seen some of those debates, and not even just with Vouch, but like, you know, the Majority Report, Sam Cedar has been, he's sort of taken issue with Kyle's approach. So there's been some debate there as well. And again, my view is like, I just don't know if that's the fight we need to be having. I think like both of them have their audiences and have their influence. They're both very big voices on the digital left, if you will, or at least the digital broad progressive space. And, you know, they can make their positions. I don't like calling people names, though. Like, I've had some people, I'm not saying it's people in this chat, but some people have said if you say anything nice about Biden, or if you suggest even that, you know, voting for Biden is something you might consider, I'll unsubscribe from your channel. And first of all, I'm like, who are you to threaten me? But second, it's like, that's sort of like, even if you suggest you might disagree with me on strategy on one specific issue, I'm cutting you out of my digital life. That's going to be disaster for the left. Absolute disaster.
Well, the left does eat its own, right?
The left does eat its own. There was a great joke. I remember telling this to Bree. Somebody, when Warren was frankly, when she betrayed Bernie, somebody's like, everyone's saying Warren's not a real member of the left, but it's the most leftist thing ever to put petty squabbles ahead of actually achieving things. So that was a great meme.
Where were we at, like a labor history conference or something, and like we're at like a retirement party or something like that for like a labor guy.
Yeah.
And in So everyone's
they were doing
giving
tributes,
speeches,
yeah.
tributes, and he's like, if we were in a war, we might be shooting at each other,
Yeah.
but we're not. So I'll give you this toast.
Yeah, it's like we'd be on different trenches.
Yeah.
But in this space we're friends. Yeah.
So
yeah.
That was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another super chat from Owen Johnson. They say, I live in MI. Is that Michigan?
Yes.
I live in Michigan, considering choking back my puke and voting for Creepy Joe. How do I convince people in safe states to vote third party? How long do you think it'll take to elect one green U.S. congressperson?
Well, Owen, thanks for the comment and question. Look, again, yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I've said to people that if back in 2016, I probably would have, again, choked it down and voted for Clinton. And maybe thrown up in the voting booth, but I would have done it, right? That's my personal view. I didn't begrudge anybody for doing otherwise. Here, I mean, there's the additional Tara Reid thing, which makes me very uncomfortable, but I totally get your perspective. One thing you might do is you might suggest to folks that if the Green Party or if an independent can start winning larger percentages of the vote, it will further legitimize the party, and that if the logic is it's all about defeating Trump, and they're being genuine, then it should only really be about voting for Biden in states that Biden can plausibly win. So go to these folks and say, it's too early right now, but say to them, look, 2 or 3 days before the election, you're going to have a good sense of where Biden is safe or not. If you live in Vermont or if you live in Alabama, those states are either going to be very safe for a Democrat or very safe for a Republican. Vote your conscience. Vote for who you want in those states. Let them know that if it's really just about stopping Trump, then your vote for Biden in Alabama, it doesn't matter. Because Trump, you cannot stop Trump. Like, I'm not a supporter of this broken system that exists. It should be one person, one vote. But the system is what it is for now. And I think one thing I've seen happen in the past, and I don't necessarily agree with them, and I don't know if they work, but I've seen some like vote trading websites or something where it's like, I live in like Massachusetts, which is definitely going Democrat, and somebody else lives in Florida. And so it's like, somebody is like, if you vote green in Massachusetts, because I'm a green supporter, then I will cast a vote for the Democrats in Florida. So it's like the green supporter gets to feel like somebody somewhere is casting their green vote. And the person that's doing a favor for the green supporter has the pleasure of knowing that a Democrat is getting a vote in a key swing state. And so it's kind of like vote switching. And that's something that you could certainly consider. Maybe get a friend. If you live in a swing state, ask a friend in a solid blue or a solid red state to do a favor for you and cast a vote for the Greens because you're voting for Joe Biden, as awful as that reality might be. And so that's something to certainly look into. In terms of electing a congressperson, I mean, that'll really be interesting.
That sounds super illegal.
Yeah. What I'm doing?
Vote switching.
Well, I mean, it does sound illegal. Vote early, vote often, right? But no, I mean, like, in terms of a green congressperson, I think, like, the way it's worked in Canada when third parties get established is you need a beachhead. So you need to find what makes the Green Party what it is. Like, the Green Party in Canada at first only had one seat, and it was in southern British Columbia, and then another seat in southern British Columbia, because it had a very particular demographic. So the Green Party in the United States needs to figure out what it is, and find one particular part of the country where they can win that seat. And I think that's something to look at, that whether it's targeting a district that is solid Democrat because they feel like the Republicans won't be a threat. Like, there are some districts in New York where the Democrats get like 90% of the vote. Like, maybe one of those states where you can quickly establish yourself in second place and then start chipping away over time. But it's like, maybe it's a college town. Maybe it's a smaller state where the Green Party can channel its resources. I don't think it's a coincidence that Bernie was able to effectively become a congressman and then a senator in a very small state where there's there's a limit to corporations' ability to dominate the election. In Vermont, corporations can't dominate things as they can in New York. TV ads aren't as expensive. Bernie can get enough volunteers if he needs to knock on every door in Vermont. You can't necessarily do that in New York State without a lot of money, right? And so maybe it's about finding a particular state that doesn't have a whole lot of congressmen, that is a very small one where the Greens can focus resources. Maybe it's about, like, I don't know, what's Hawaii like for Green politics? Find a small state that you can target and win from there. It might also work to find state-level representatives and then use that state-level representative strength to grow into a party, to grow at the Congress-wide district. For instance, and again, I'm not a Green Party supporter in Canada. Our Greens are more centrist than the Greens in the United States. They're the left-wing party in Canada is the NDP. But what they did in New Brunswick was they won a seat in Fredericton, which at the provincial level is 4 or 5 seats. Federally, it's only 1. But it's not a surprise that they were able to win a provincial seat in Fredericton and then win, I think, 2 in Fredericton in the following election and then turn that into a federal MP. And I think that's what you need to do. You need to kind of build up the ladder, right? Or find a regional base. That's the way political parties grow. And frankly, it's not going to happen running for president. You're never going to run right to president. The one thing a presidential run can do is build brand recognition. Right? But the challenge there is that the Green Party never gets any attention because they don't crack the 10, 15% or whatever you need to get on debates.
Okay, we have another super chat from John Barlich. I want everyone to recognize that I've been saying his name correctly ever since the last time. And they say, hey, I personally am on the Kyle side of the argument because Joe Biden doesn't care about Medicare for all and the whole Tara thing. But I agree we should come together and get as many progressives in Congress.
Yeah, I mean that's my view, right? I mean, look, I where I'm at, honestly, is like if I was an American, depending on where I lived, right now I might lean more towards Bernie's perspective, not the perspective where he's calling people irresponsible. I made a video about how Bernie was wrong to do that. I still think that. Calling his own supporters irresponsible. And some people have said I interpreted that wrong. I don't think I did. But in any case...
To be fair, do you ever think you interpret anything wrong?
I can be wrong sometimes, rare as it is, But at the end of the day, my view is that if you don't want to vote for Joe, you have my full support. You're still welcome in this community. You do want to vote for Joe, you have my full support. You're welcome in this community. You want to vote third party, you have my full support. You're welcome in this community. You want to vote for Trump, you're still welcome in this community because I don't silence anyone, but you do not have my support, and you might even get a bit of my ridicule. No voting for Trump. I've had some people say, I'm just going to vote for Trump because there's no point. And that's the dumbest thing ever. Vote third party, don't vote, write in Bernie, write in Batman, just don't vote for Donald Trump. Or the Libertarians. Don't vote for the Libertarians either. That's stupid too. Yeah. But yeah, 100%. Get progressives in. Get progressives in to the legislature. Get down back. Look, we can't be fighting right now. Rashida Tlaib is facing a tough primary. AOC, I think, is fine, but she is facing a primary too. It's more important that even, whether you're voting for Biden or you're not voting for Biden, everyone should be doing what they can to get Nancy Pelosi out, support Shahid Buttar, help AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, all these people at your local level, see who's running. If anybody, DSA nominated candidates in your state houses and state senates and things like that. And we see jump.
So John is trolling me now, which is really funny and kind of sweet. And he says, thanks for saying my name right. I do try.
John.
I do really, really try to pronounce everyone's names right. Yeah. I think it took me forever to say, the Zachary's name right and to say, Joseph's name correctly and, Craig's. It's a thing. It's hard when people are watching you and it's, live. I can read, I swear.
So somebody is saying a reminder to smash that like button.
Oh, yeah. Please hit the like button.
Apparently it helps. Apparently it helps. I really appreciate that. If you have anybody who really likes this sort of content, you can share the link on Facebook and Twitter. That might help too. But, I mean, it's great to just see all this great conversation. Did we get that King of the Hill question? I'm interested.
Probably, but aren't we going in order?
Yeah, but I wanted that question. Somebody was like, let me see if I can. King.
I don't know if searching King in your chat will bring up any.
Oh.
It's Craig.
Okay, if King of the Hill hadn't gone off the air in 2010, would all the main characters be Trump supporters? Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so for those who don't know, okay, so Craig, I was going to read it. I feel bad now because he just did it. Craig, sorry, Craig. Honestly, I'm so sorry. If you want, you'll have, I'll refund that because I was going to read that question. Okay, so Craig has a super chat here. If King of the Hill was still on TV, would the main characters vote Trump? If not, is that really an accurate depiction of the communities the characters represent? That's an interesting question because you have, the show has a balance of representing, rural southern Texas, overwhelmingly white, sort of working class, lower middle class, depending on the definition. Hank's the middle management type thing, In the original run of the show, as we remember, basically everyone, except for Luann, who voted communist, was a Bush voter. And then what happens is Hank gets turned off George Bush. This is the first time Bush ran. This is back in 1999. Gets turned off Bush because Bush has a bad handshake. I don't know if you remember this. You remember seeing that, right?
I have watched it sporadically.
And then he ends up getting to the poll, but you never know who he votes for. You don't ultimately know if he votes for Bush or Gore. But at least in the beginning of the show, everyone's a Republican. Everybody's a Republican, basically. The demographic realities, especially back in 2016, is that most of them voted for Trump. White women in 2016 voted for Trump, right? 55% of them. But then when you add in the fact that these are married women in a red state, they likely voted for Donald Trump, especially because Peggy only has a 2-year degree. The marker is usually women with a bachelor's degree and higher. Yes, I'm going this deep. I know Peggy only has a 2-year degree. It's a storyline. How she's not qualified to teach if the school board adopts a 4-year teaching qualification. So she only has a 2-year degree. None of the women are particularly highly educated, except for maybe Min. And so they almost certainly all voted for Trump. That would be the view. Now, on the show, they make it very clear that Hank is not a racist. That Hank believes in, he cited Martin Luther King. And so you might have it where I would say maybe Dale and Bill likely vote for Donald Trump. Maybe Hank has a crisis of conscience and cannot vote for Trump. Because Hank is also a big fan of LBJ and was also a big fan, I forget her name now, the former Texas Democratic governor who Bill briefly dates. So yes, I do actually know a good amount of King of the Hill.
Now, Bobby wasn't old enough to vote, but he was not a Republican.
Bobby likely doesn't strike me as a Republican. And the question would be, where do the cons go? Or the Soufenufenfoam go? Where does con Soufenufenfoam go? They're very hyper-capitalist, former refugees of a communist society. Like Cubans, I think that trends them Republican. But in general, people of color overwhelmingly voted Democrat. And I think that would be the same. Now, this election, women in general have been moving to the Democrats. Less so women without college degrees, though. So that's a good question. There was often this debate about fictional characters that aren't evil, which ones of them are voting Trump. And I said a majority of the men on The Office would vote for Trump. Statistically, Michael Scott, Jim, Dwight definitely. Those guys, most of them are voting for Trump because you look, they're small town Pennsylvania. It's a Trump state. Men vote Trump. White men vote Trump. Most of your favorite characters on The Office, they made America great again, folks.
That's a stretch. We like those characters.
Yeah, we like those characters.
Okay. OG Swag.
So I wanted to were people impressed by my King of the Hill knowledge? I haven't seen it in forever, but I do love the show.
I don't know. Okay. We'll see. Okay, OG Swag with a super chat. What's your thoughts on Matthew Green as the next NDP leader, assuming the party makes no progress in the next election? Oh, boo.
Well, my view is that Jagmeet is doing a great job. Not perfect, of course.
No. Obviously, he's talking about the ONDP.
Oh, no, you're saying the next federal leader. Talking about.
But Matthew Green's...
No, he's a federal MP.
Is he really?
Yeah, he's a federal MP.
Shit.
Yes, yeah.
At least this is not as bad as...
Although maybe he could also do that too. Like, I think he could serve at either level.
Matthew Green is being considered because from Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean, maybe
the next ONDP leader.
I mean, he could always switch down. He represents Andrea's riding, so he could. But like the analogous riding. But my view is Singh's doing a great job. He's not perfect. I didn't like his general handling of the Wet'suwet'en affair. I didn't like that. I thought it was in some ways a little cowardly how he didn't call out John Horgan more. But in general, he's done a good job as a leader. He's done a very good job during this crisis. I think he's on the right track. If, however, he's not leader beyond the next election, I do think Matthew Green could be somebody that you would consider a leadership hopeful. I do think that. He's on the left. He represents a safe riding, which is always a bonus. He is deeply intertwined with social movements. He's not new to politics. He has a long municipal career, so he has a sense of on the ground politics. I think that he could be a great leader. I think he could be a great leader. I really do. I don't know what his French is like. That's something that I actually don't know. I'd have to ask him. But I think he could be a great leader, and I think like if I would be approaching him personally, asking him to run for leader in that context, but. Matthew Green, more than anyone, has made it clear that he's 100% behind Jagmeet, like most of us are.
Oh, I definitely see him more as the next ONDP leader.
And that might be a thing, too. We'll see.
One, I don't think he speaks French.
Yeah,
and two, he's, very, Hamilton.
Yeah, he's very popular at the ONDP level as well. And he was at the ONDP convention, and he was very popular there, yes.
He's very popular at the OFL, yeah. Okay, Ben Riley, super chat from Ben Riley. Oh, God. Another pronunciation. Vahish, pronounced Vahish, LOL.
No, vow. Is it?
Vow? VAWHS.
Vaush. Is it Vaush, right?
Okay, Vauhish.
Yeah.
Is live streaming now.
Oh, okay, that's exciting. Tell him I said hi. I don't know. I've never watched him. I know loosely about him that he's on the left-ish, but he's more centrist. He's a little bit combative. I know much about him. A lot of people are saying Nikki Ashton would be great. I think so.
Angus.
Charlie Angus would be great. Like a lot of
these are all people who have run for the federal leadership before and not made it.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see who runs.
I mean, if Nikki were to run a third time and lose, that's not good. That's bad.
I think she might I think she'll run at some point.
She better if she shoots her shot, she better get it in.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise it's just embarrassing. How many times are you going to run and not win?
I mean, Joe Biden did take his third time to win.
Are you talking about this time?
Yeah. Well, to win the nomination, yeah.
But is this something to be proud of?
I don't know. I'm just saying. His first time, he plagiarized and got kicked. He had to drop out. The second time, he was just really bad.
This is exactly what I'm saying. This is the legacy of people who run and run and run and run. And eventually, you just win by default. But, no one really wants you.
Yeah. No, well, you're right. No one wants Biden. That's for sure.
Right?
Yeah. No one wants Biden, yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, ready for Canadian content question?
For sure, 100%. Okay, I love CanCon.
Justin Frederick says, which students are eligible for the new student benefit?
It looks to include a good amount of students. It's not 100% done yet because it still, I think, has to be passed through Parliament to some degree. But my understanding is it's for students that aren't eligible for the CERB. So if you're already, because there are some students that are eligible for the CERB that are included in it. Let me pull up the CESB because I want to pull it up here. So if you go to this website, so basically you're eligible if they have lost work or cannot find work due to the pandemic. Working students that are earning less than $1,000 per month are also eligible to apply if their hours have been cut. So basically, it's an additional thing that for the students that were left out of the CERB. And you'll get $1,250 a month from May to August. So it's $750 less a month than the CERB and 1 month less. So it's quite a bit less money. It's higher amounts if you're caring for somebody or if you have a disability. I'm just reading it off this website here. I think the payout will be similar. They also have an additional program that basically allows you to earn some benefits if you're volunteering. And I think that's additional. So on the whole, it's better than what existed before, which was nothing, but it still leaves out a lot of students. And I'm sort of concerned about it from that perspective.
Okay, can you put back the
Yeah,
screen?
I'm just double checking. We've been demonetized, so I'm just going to start saying the coronavirus.
I can't believe you.
Look, it just happens.
How hard is it
YouTube
not
is
to
very
say?
demonetized trigger happy with live streams because I could just start spouting epithets and slurs if I wanted, right? I'm just saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, next question is from Joseph Mangano. And he says he wants your thoughts on why Democrats... I just lost it. It just moved down. On why Democrats have done something bad with something pandemic. Why don't you just talk some more?
Okay, wait. Are you going to find it?
I'm trying.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, what do people think of the King of the Hill answer? I thought that was pretty good.
People liked it.
Biden's so weak. Kathy is saying we need Charlie for indigenous rights.
Got it.
Certainly a good point.
Okay. Joseph Mangano wants to know your thoughts on why the Dems have no backbone on the coronavirus response legislation. Sorry, Joseph.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is most of the Democratic Congress people suck. And so it's not that they don't have backbone. It's just that, like, you don't fight for things you don't believe in, right? And so Nancy Pelosi is much more willing to fight for her ice cream than for working class people. And that represents a lot of people in the Democratic caucus. But I think one of the additional challenges, especially for the first round, was to get around any filibuster, things basically had to be unanimous. So even if one person voted against it, then it could have taken weeks to get people their help, longer than it's already taking. So it really was this scenario where everyone was sort of trapped, right? And the question would be, if the Democrats held out, would anything have changed except for the fact that the aid was even slower and less impactful? And I think that's one of the arguments, which is why you saw Bernie and AOC ultimately not block the legislation, but offer severe criticisms of it. I don't know what more they could do. Bernie was willing to block it, however, because Mitch McConnell and a few other Lindsey Graham and a few other Republican senators were trying to amend the legislation because, God forbid, some poor people would earn slightly more money from the $1,200 than they would at their regular minimum wage job. And that was unacceptable. So they basically were like, well, we want the poorest people to get less money. And Bernie said, if you do that, I'm not going to pass the legislation in terms of the corporate funding. And so everyone was sort of at a stalemate. The legislation was bad, of course, but could the legislation have been better? And there's similar things here in Canada. The NDP is basically, it's a minority government, but to get a lot of the legislation passed quickly, things have to be unanimous, because otherwise you got to send it to committee. Many of the committee members are all over the country right now, not traveling to Parliament because of the travel restrictions and because they want to set a good example and not be doing unnecessary travel. And so, it's like you offer your criticism, but in terms of blocking the legislation, there's a real political and social and human cost to that. And it's something that's weighing on people. And I'm not saying that's necessarily an excuse, but I'm saying that it is what it is. Like, the Republicans backed down on the money that was going to the poor, not because they care about the poor, but because they knew that if they made that an issue, the entire package, including their corporate goodies, would be blocked as well. Yeah.
Okay, another super chat from John Barlich. And they say, which U.S. governors are doing a good job and a bad job?
I mean, I'm not like on the ground as much with the U.S., so it's hard for me to say which governors are doing a good job and a bad job. I mean, certainly any governor that's considering opening right now already is doing a bad job. Any governor that was like, I think it was one of the southern governors who was like, we just found out yesterday that apparently you can pass this, you can pass the coronavirus even if you don't have symptoms.
That was from South Carolina.
Yeah. And I'm like, my God, they were telling us that back in January. That was why this was such a big deal. Because it's the people don't have a target on their back saying, I have the coronavirus. You don't know often until you start feeling it, and then it's too late. And so we've all known that, or at least officials have known that. And so those people are doing a bad job. I think Andrew Cuomo's done a bad job. His state's been hardest hit, and I get it. It's not strictly his fault. New York State has a bunch of disadvantages. It's a world city. In fact, New York City might be the world city, except for London, maybe. And so it's obviously a city where people travel to and from by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions a day. And that in addition to commuters and things like that. So, and very highly dense population rates. But Cuomo's a guy that was cutting healthcare during this pandemic. I think that a lot of governors have, failed to do the work beforehand. It's sort of like my criticisms of Doug Ford during this crisis. Because some Canadians have wanted to praise Doug Ford, a conservative premier in Canada, even though they would never praise him under normal circumstances, basically because he's not as bad as Trump. And a lot of the things he's done during the crisis, he's been good at his press conferences, he's getting information to the people, he's been good at being a reassuring voice.
He's good at the emotional connection.
The emotional connection of it. But where you do good or bad in a crisis is often about what you did in the year or two before the crisis. Doug Ford, like a lot of people, didn't have sufficient medical equipment. Doug Ford cut inspections in care homes. Long-term care homes where the elderly and vulnerable live, and where a majority of the people that have died in Canada and in Ontario. And staff there as well have been affected, right? We're talking some care homes where 100 people live and 30 of them have died. Incredible carnage that this government has helped create. Doug Ford abolished a law that was passed under the previous government, one of the few things Kathleen Wynne did well, which was basically everybody, even if you're in a minimum wage job at McDonald's, you get 2 paid sick days a year. Everyone gets 2. Even a minimum wage non-union job. He cut that. Making people go to work sick. And he told people to go on spring break. And then 2 days later had to walk that back because it was stupid. Mm-hmm. And so much like Andrew Cuomo, you can sound like a leader and you can sound like a statesman and you can say all the right things when the crisis is happening. But when the chips were down and you were trying to cut healthcare, that's when you actually failed to do a good job during the crisis. And I might say that every single U.S. governor who does not back Medicare for all has done a bad job too. I might say that as well in a more general term. If you're not supporting Medicare for all, you've done a bad job. Because the lack of universal health care is a travesty, but especially during a pandemic, you're only as strong as your weakest healthcare link, and a lack of universal health care means you have tens of millions of weak links.
Yes. Okay. Another super chat, Kevin McAlpin.
Oh. Yeah. McAlpin, yeah.
McAlpin,
yeah.
That is what I said.
Yeah.
Said Georgia didn't even vote for Kemp, WTF. Kemp is the governor of Georgia?
Yeah, there's the whole thing. Basically, Stacey Abrams, I know she's a neoliberal and she basically took Bloomberg's money, but she should be governor of Georgia. They basically screwed her out of the election. There was a lot of anti-black gerrymandering, and I would say that look, if what happened, Evo Morales got invaded for less than what Kemp did in Georgia. He should have, a foreign country could have invaded Georgia for its electoral irregularities. That's how bad it was.
You're so dramatic. Okay, super chat from All My Lettuce. And they say, how do we get people to understand that the NDP is dealing with the coronavirus, but the Liberals are getting the attention?
Yeah, I mean, and All My Lettuce, thank you for the comment. That's one thing I've been noting in my a lot of my tweets and stuff. Is that exact point that Jagmeet every step of the way is improving the Liberals' plans. The Liberals, haven't been the worst in the world. They've done some things decently, but their original wage subsidy was too low. The CERB was too restrictive at first. It's still not good enough, but every step of the way they get closer and closer to what Jagmeet Singh proposed. I think it's just about using your voice, getting your voice out there. I've been doing that on social media. As I noted last week, I'm in talks about starting a purely Canadian-focused podcast with another creator. And hopefully that starts sooner than later. Obviously, the coronavirus crisis has slowed everything down because, you don't have as much free time during the day when the daycares are closed. So it's about getting my work done day to day. That's still a challenge, but that's something I want to start. And you can bet that coverage of the NDP will be plentiful on that podcast. On social media, share Jagmeet's tweets, share the NDP's press releases. When journalists write articles about something and they don't mention the NDP, don't attack them, but just suggest, hey, it might have been nice to reference the fact that the NDP's position here is distinct from the other parties, and I think meaningfully so. These are things that you can do in small and big ways. I've been trying, as I often do, to pitch stories. I've written for the Washington Post a couple times on this, but right now it's very hard to get a lot of publishing because everything is so focused on the day-to-day news. But I am trying to write more about the NDP. One of my goals with this channel was to produce left-wing content, but the real challenge with Canadian content on YouTube is the numbers aren't there, and it actually drags down the rest of the channel in some ways. And when I make a Canadian video and it gets 400 views, like that takes up a slot of posting, and generally you only want to post 2 or 3 videos a day, and so it's a challenge. But through writing and through that potential podcast, I'm definitely going to be developing more Canadian content in addition to this stuff here on YouTube, because I do feel a responsibility to talk more about that.
Okay, Kathy Lewis, channel member, says, please call out that petition from Rebel Media about Dr. Tam.
Yeah, for those who don't know,
explain what that is.
For those who don't know, Rebel Media is like, I'm trying to think what the analog is in the States. It's basically like a right-wing, like way to the right of Fox News even in some ways. It's like a online right-wing media source that gets turned on by oil. Basically tried to say that the Notre Dame fire was a covered up Islamic attack, and that they were covering it up to protect that. A lot of these people are associated with the Rebel was at least formally associated with Faith Goldie and Lauren Southern, whose names were etched on the or who were deemed inspirations by the person that committed the atrocity at the Quebec Mosque, and his name was on the weapon of the man who did those atrocities in Christchurch, New Zealand. It is, in essence, one of the leading voices in far-right media in Canada and around the world, and they often, trade in xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia, and right now they're basically trying to suggest that Canada is covering up China's flaws here because Justin Trudeau is a secret communist, and Dr. Tam, and they're trading on the fact that she's also an Asian Canadian, so she's supposedly disloyal, and that she's in the bag for the Chinese Communist Party. And it's just abhorrent racism, and I don't want to bring too much attention to the Rebel in these sorts of contexts, but they are a big force on the Canadian right, and they're a massive source here on YouTube. They have well over 100,000 subscribers, which for any Canadian-based thing that primarily covers Canada, it's massive. And they're awful. One thing that's great is that a lot of Canadian mainstream media have sort of learn to question them and sort of disregard them, because during the federal election, I don't know if you remember this, but both Blanchette, the Bloc Québécois leader, and Jagmeet Singh, they got questions after one of the debates from Keena Bext or whatever. I don't know how to say his last name. He's a ghoul, like they all are. But basically, he tried to ask a question, and Singh was like, "What outlet are you from?" And he was like, "I'm from the Rebel." Or he tried to change the name. He tried to like give it an acronym or something. Yeah. But he realized it was from the Rebel, and Singh was like, "No, I'm not taking your question, bro." Basically, and it was great. So yeah, disregard the Rebel as a legitimate source, but don't underestimate the fact that they have a massive footprint in Canada, and they are using this crisis to spread anti-Chinese racism, much like Joe Biden and Donald Trump are.
Okay, we have another super chat from John Barlich, and they say, who would win, Danny DeVito or Trump?
You know, Danny DeVito.
But are we talking about Danny DeVito, like his character in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, or like Danny DeVito, like the leftist real person?
Okay, well, if it's Frank Reynolds is already probably voting Trump, right? Like he's definitely Frank Reynolds is probably a MAGA guy, or maybe even more right wing than that. But Danny DeVito is very much a Bernie guy, very much a Bernie guy. I don't know how he would be in politics. I mean, I honestly think that if DeVito was going to run, I mean, maybe he could beat Trump. Maybe. I don't know. It'll be interesting. It's hard.
He's a little short for politics.
People often judge short people in politics. Like the taller of the presidential candidates wins more often than not. And DeVito is quite short. But I don't know. I think he would have a chance. I think he would actually have a chance. I really do.
I think you just want to believe that every leftist who would run might have a chance.
I was right in 2016 that Bernie would have beaten Trump. We all know it. We all know it's the case.
I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California. Did you know that?
I did. I did know that.
Okay. Ready for the next one?
For sure.
Okay. Dan Cordobin says, what can be done in light of the mass shooting in Portapique, Nova Scotia, to make sure this never happens again?
I mean, there were a few things in terms of never happening again. It's going to be really hard, if I'm being honest. You can't take away everyone's firearms. So even if you restrict certain weapons, people will still be able to commit atrocities. I don't know what the full answer is. I mean, it's a tragedy, right? I wanted to talk about this, but I haven't had the words really for the last couple of days. David Dole also did a really good video covering this. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things we need to do. One, we do probably need to have some sort of restriction on certain firearms. I know that's not always a universal opinion on the left, but I don't see the proletariat being able to arm itself and take over the state if we all get AR-15s. I just don't see that as viable. So,
well, it didn't work in the States.
So I mean, it is what it is, right? But some elements of gun control, of course not total gun control, could help. Better mental health services could help. Again, not everyone, because there's often that, especially when we talk about white people who did it, always mentally unstable, but mental health issues do play a role. A better mental health funding could help. In this particular case, there was worries about how easily this guy could impersonate an RCMP officer, right? He basically got whether he stole it or bought it or whatever, the uniform, the man who the shooter was an official RCMP uniform. It wasn't a replica. It was a real uniform. And when it comes to your ability to to fit a car to look like an RCMP car, it's very easy because the cars are sold on auction. But beyond that, on the Canadian RCMP website, you can actually get a detailed instruction about how to design a car to look like an RCMP car, down to the color and specific measurements of the fonts and logos and stuff. Basically a how-to guide to impersonate a police vehicle. So that's something they should probably look into. Another factor a lot of people were noting on the news this morning was that the Amber Alert, the general emergency system we have in Canada, which basically allows that, that loud noise where it's like, bow, 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 and it's like a child's gone missing in your general area. Keep an eye out for this car, this person, these amount of people, whatever. And they've also used them for other things. They've even used them for the coronavirus, where they've said, just a reminder, don't go outside unless you have to. So there's no reason why, at least from a lot of people's perspectives, they couldn't have used that to basically say, hey, everybody, stay inside. There's somebody impersonating a police officer, or in general, it's not safe. Please exercise caution. And at least one person they lost their life because they were out for a walk. And maybe, if the alert went out, they wouldn't have been out for a walk that day, and they wouldn't have lost their life. So there's like immediate things, but there's also longer range things. And I think it's a mixture, frankly, of some gun control, large investments into mental health, infrastructure. Frankly, I think a lot of this is like, we have to more directly challenge toxic masculinity. We have to challenge white male entitlement to some degree. These shooters are overwhelmingly, they're almost exclusively male, and they are often white in Canada. And so, we have to address the fact that, there's a cultural politics to who does these sorts of things. And I think that's important too.
Okay. Super chat from Tanya A. They want to comment on Planet of the Humans, more released yesterday.
Tanya, thank you for the super chat. I haven't seen it yet. I'm excited to. So Michael Moore released a new documentary, and I believe it's free. I think whether it's on his website or YouTube channel, I'm not sure, but I think it's at least free for the next little bit. You can just go and stream it. I'm excited to see it. I've been a fan of some of his documentaries. Over the years, Sicko, Bowling for Columbine. Yeah. These were really great, documentaries. And, Michael Moore's sort of interesting to me, where he's definitely part of the left, but also sort of still has those vestiges of a kind of pre-2008 liberalism that I find frustrating. It's really somebody that I think, though, ultimately means well. And I think I have a great respect for in that way. If you want to listen to a podcast that's basically inspired by their relationship with Michael Moore, just look up Luke Savage and Will Sloan. It's called Michael and Us, and they do it's like a movie review podcast, leftist commentary. You might know Luke Savage. He's got a big Twitter account, and he's a writer for Jacobin. He's been a guest on this channel. Back during the Canadian election, we talked about Bernie and Warren a little bit, and that's something to look up, because they've talked about him and some of the complicated relationships he has with the left. But certainly, I'll be watching it.
Okay, we have a question from Andrew Skipsky, but I lost it for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, hold on. Something about it was interesting. I want to find it again.
Yeah, for sure. People are saying they liked Fahrenheit 9/11, or that was really good. Yeah, no, for sure.
Apparently, Whoopi Goldberg defended Nancy Pelosi's ice cream.
Yeah, I mean, these celebrities have really been showing taking their masks off. Look, it's not that Nancy Pelosi has fancy ice cream. It's not. It's the political optics of it all. Right? Like I said in my video, I made a video on that whole affair. And the video did quite well. And what I said in that video was very clear. Donald Trump lives in a solid gold house, like a condo, whatever. The man is obviously even more out of touch than Nancy Pelosi. But from an optics perspective, Nancy Pelosi was on a late night show.
But what did I tell you? People were going to say about the ice cream.
Yeah, what?
That it's from a small business, that she was buying it to support a local small business.
Yeah, but that only goes so far, right? It's like...
Doesn't matter, I was right.
Yeah. Bernie got it right when he did the thing with Ben and Jerry's. And I think, that was
cute.
Yeah. And it was like a Vermont thing. It was different. But here, it was I got all this fancy ice cream. it doesn't matter if it's not that fancy. It's not like it's $60 a thing or whatever. It doesn't matter that's a small business. The optics are, we are in a crisis. People are literally do not know where their food is coming from. People are risking, literally, I'm not exaggerating, they are risking death to go wait in food bank lines. Mm-hmm. And Nancy Pelosi is like, what would I do without ice cream in my $24,000 worth of refrigerators? She's got two $12,000 refrigerators next to one another. The optics are awful. She's doing politics badly.
I thought it was $24,000 worth of ice cream.
No, it was two fridges worth $12,000. But the point is, fancy kitchen ladies like, oh, I'm so relatable. What's in my fridge? Oh, just just a bunch of rich people ice cream. This nicely stocked fridge. It was such bad politics. Bad politics.
I would like to take this moment to point out that Christo Aivalis, you are a foodie, and you like nice ice cream.
Babe, no, I don't actually like nice ice cream. Guys, I'll tell you this. I don't like nice ice cream because I don't like I'm not a huge dairy person. So when we get really good ice cream, no, it has a high cream.
Okay, but we do. I'm just teasing.
No, but we have a high fat, like a milk fat content, and I taste the dairy more. I like frozen yogurt in some ways more because it's more about like the flavor of the vanilla or the ice cream.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this is gonna be my last question, and then I'm going to bed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Andrew Skipsky. My only argument for voting for Biden would be that the left should prefer to fight a declining neoliberalism in the Democratic Party than an ascendant fascism in the GOP.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think that's an unreasonable point. One of the arguments going back to 2016 was obviously, let's pick Bernie. But when Clinton lost, everyone thought, okay, this obviously sucks. No one wants Trump as president. But it proves us right that Clinton's brand of politics don't work. It proves us right that Bernie would have won. And also, after these 4 years, people are going to realize that that Trump was awful and that neoliberalism failed to stop him, and they will run head over heels to Bernie, or even like before we found out who she really was, like Elizabeth Warren or something. They're going to go to a left-wing person that the Democrats have never gone to. And we were wrong in a sense, because what happened was return to normalcy Joe, nothing will fundamentally change Joe, won. And won quite handily. He like this was less close than last time where Bernie was 1v1 on Clinton. Especially boomers and senior citizen Democrats really bought into the back to normalcy argument. They loved it. And so accelerationism in that sense didn't work. This didn't push us any closer to winning. And so there's no reason to necessarily believe that another 4 years of Donald Trump will bring us 4 years closer to Bernie or Rashida Tlaib or whoever is going to run from the left in 2024. An argument you could make, as I said, not fighting like a declining neoliberalism, is also that in one way it's harder for the left when the Democrats are in power, because when you oppose the government, it looks like you're opposing your people like trying to get good stuff done. The whole like Bernie Sanders didn't support Obama hard enough because Bernie was actually keeping Obama accountable as much as he could. But my argument is that, and I think that's certainly playing a case, in Canada, it's hard for the NDP to criticize the Liberals because people will say we're just siding with the Conservatives, which is BS, but they'll say it. On the other hand, when Democrats are in power and they're not getting anything done and they're showing their hand as the neoliberal reactionaries that they are, might give the left the ability to criticize them. They can spend their time criticizing those in power, which are the neoliberals. And I don't know what my position is. I'm not an accelerationist. I'm not like, oh, Trump needed to win for Bernie to win. Like it's like almost like some destiny. But to the extent that I was at least somewhat, I guess, not amenable to the idea, but I could acknowledge the possibility of like Trump equals a move to the left in 4 years argument, I'm far less convinced now. People like older Democrats 100% got shell shocked, and they 100% ran back to Joe Biden. You know what I mean? It's basically the old, like white neoliberal, guy, segregationist. You know what I mean? Whatever. He's not Trump, and we like that he was the last vice president for the Democrats. He's our guy. So I agree that there might be some opportunities to fight there. That's something to consider.
Okay, put your thing all the way there.
Okay, yeah. So I'm moving up to the top. I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. We'll probably go till about 10:15 or so and continue going. But Brianna's going to head out.
Okay, yeah. You have a super chat that you need to read.
Oh, yes.
And do you have water?
No, I do need some water.
Water?
Yes, thank you. John Barlich.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night, Brianna. Everyone say good night to Bri. So John says, who should be the next head of the DNC, or should be the head? I mean, it's a good question. Not what's his name again? I don't even know. Not Tom Perez. That's for damn sure. Maybe give Keith Ellison his turn. Like he didn't get his turn last time. Maybe make Keith Ellison the head. Somebody from the Bernie wing would be great, or even just somebody that like wasn't blatantly anti-Bernie. Violet on Content Boutique basically said, just to clarify, that Bernie took the stand on the extra unemployment insurance, not the $1,200. Although there was the issue with that where initially it was everyone was going to get $1,200, but if you were really poor, you would only get like $700. And I think Bernie did fight that too. But you're right that Bernie also spoke about the enhanced unemployment insurance benefits going to folks even when they would come ahead on money. So that's a great point. Thanks for clarifying that. Comrade Internet says Gavin Newsom of California is one to keep eyes on. Thank you, Comrade Internet. We've actually spoken about that. You're right. It's very interesting to see the 3 Pacific Coast governors basically willing to almost go it on their own. And I find that very interesting. And from what I can tell, they have done a decent job, those 3 states. I know specifically as well, Jay Inslee and John Horgan, the Premier of British Columbia in Canada, and Inslee's the governor of Washington State, have been doing work together. And so in a way where both Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump haven't been doing quite enough, Trump doing worse than Trudeau, they've both kind of been picking up the slack within their local corner of the continent. Oh, we just have a new channel member, Lonnie McVeigh. Thank you so much for joining the channel. Basically, joining the channel is sort of like Patreon, but here on YouTube. So for those who know what Patreon is, it's like a subscription service where you can give a certain amount of dollars a month to the channel, and in exchange, you get some perks. You'll get your name on the end cards of all the videos, and it's a great way to support the channel for a few reasons. One, it's extra money to help the channel grow. But beyond that, it's YouTube's algorithms can be very sporadic or erratic. And it's some days, some weeks you get a lot of views, some weeks you don't get as many. And sometimes YouTube decides to demonetize your videos or you just, or something like that. And so the income you get from ads can fluctuate very wildly. And Patreon is a nice steady stream of support, or joining the channel as a member here is a nice level of support. Also, it helps because there are some times that I will make a video sort of knowing it'll get demonetized, right? Whether like some of my videos on Tara Reid, some of them did, some of them didn't. It was weird got demonetized. But I wasn't not going to talk about Joe Biden and Tara Reade just because it was going to get demonetized. I've covered certain, like, the Qassam Soleimani thing, some of those videos, certain things, certain videos during the coronavirus I knew would get demonetized, but I made them because they were important. And so one of the reasons I can make videos like that is I have the support of channel members. So if you guys have the ability, I know a lot of people don't have money right now, extra money right now, but it's something you can do to support the channel on an ongoing basis. And you get a couple little perks. You get a little badge next to your name, and the badge changes colors as you've been a member a bit longer. You'll see that Joseph Mangano, for instance, has a yellow one because he's been a member for 2 months now. Some other people have the 1 month badge or what have you. And that's something that's a little perk that's good. And it also, when you comment on my videos, it shows me that you're a member. And I read as many comments as I can, but I especially read my ones by my members. Yeah, there's a lot of people, Matt Lipton saying that people were sharing some like COVID misinformation. I'm seeing a lot of that, and it's getting mixed in with anti-vaxxers and a lot of stuff. And look, like, it's really troubling that we're seeing so much of that. Like, don't share that stuff. If they're not important to you, honestly, just like delete them off your Facebook and stuff. Don't give them oxygen. If it's a loved one, like, the best way to do it is not attack them. I've actually read some stuff. The Canadian CBC did a segment on how to talk to your relatives about the lies they're spreading on the coronavirus. And basically it said something along the lines of, you don't want to make them feel like they're stupid. You want to just suggest to them that maybe the news they're sharing isn't accurate and there's like another perspective you can look at. Ian says here, and a couple of days ago, South Korea had 163 cases of people who had recovered and have now tested positive again. That's concerning, right? That because I mean, if it's like the flu, it's seasonal. This might be something we have to deal with on a seasonal basis, and hopefully we get a vaccine. But it's very concerning if you can test positive so rapidly. We'll have to see about that more as this goes along. Comrade Internet says, I think American balkanization discourse needs to be acknowledged because if it is not, it will take everybody by surprise. That's a good point. For those who don't know, balkanization is like the fragmentation of like a region which represents the Balkans, which is, with the fall of both the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, you saw the rise of like more than a dozen in some ways, like small states based off very rough ethnic, linguistic, and religious affiliation, and like that's that hodgepodge, at least indirectly, led to World War I. That's the whole thing. Like some blasted thing in the Balkans is going to cause this war. That was the prophetic quote. I forget who said it, but it was somebody from Britain, I think. And basically, the argument is that Comrade Internet has been mentioning, and that others have as well, is that, this crisis with like some states effectively going their own way, some of them, wanting to open up early, some of them basically adopting quasi-national approaches because they don't trust the federal government, could be the start of a fragmentation in the United States. I'm not necessarily convinced, but I don't see it as an unreasonable argument. Ford is not as bad as Kenny. Alexander, you're right. Kenny is by far the worst. The one thing Kenny's government, and I don't know if this goes back to Rachel Notley's time, is they had a lot of equipment. The Alberta government did a decent job of being well-stocked with N95s and things like that. But Kenny, by far, is the worst. He's been slashing jobs. He's used the crisis as a political tool. He hasn't done enough to protect people. He's been the worst premier. By far, he's been the worst. So you're right. Ford hasn't been the worst in Canada. Another reason why he's getting away with it is because he wasn't technically the worst. JC says, really would like if Bernie Sanders went green or independent. I don't see it happening, though. I know a lot of people want it, but I don't see it happening. Whether you think it's a good idea or not, Bernie's a man of his word. And Bernie made a promise. I'll back the nominee. I'll back them, fundraise for them. If they want me to do rallies for them, I'll do rallies. He did 41 rallies for Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And Bernie, I think he dedicated himself to the process, right? Like Bernie basically said, like, I'm in this. If I win, I win. If I lose, I'll back the nominee. If Bernie was going to run as an independent, I feel like he would have just done it. Like back in 2015, 2016, he would have run as an independent, or he would have run as a Green, or he would have run as, a Democratic Socialist. But I think once he signed up for a nomination, I think Bernie, as a man of his word, agreed to at the very least drop out, endorse the nominee, and not interfere. I don't think he's going to run as an independent. Christopher Balliot says the American political spectrum is basically right to center right. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's a few bright spots. Obviously, Bernie's been a historical exception. There are some Democrats, like whether we like to say it or not, there are some that are like more centrist. People like Elizabeth Warren, and again, I'm not really a fan, probably would be classified better as a centrist than on the right if you look at her policy positions. You got like a rise of like new left-leaning Congress people like Omar Tlaib in AOC. But yeah, in general, the Democratic Party, at least before Bernie's rise, was a center-right party, and the Republicans were a like right-wing party. And like sort of like the most moderate Republicans sort of blended with the most right-wing Democrats, as they sort of, at the margins, they sort of mixed in with one another. In Canada, our two main political parties, it's the same thing. We have a Liberal Party that's centrist, center-right, and a Conservative Party that's center-right to right-wing, depending on the time and who you're talking about. Matt Lipton with the super chat. Matt, thank you again for the support. You catch Matthew Green's Facebook Live with Peter Julian this afternoon. Not today. It was actually making my video this afternoon. I have to time my video makings with my son's naps when Bree's out, because today Bree was doing a more traditional 9 to 5. And so I was making I had that window to make the video. But I have been catching Matthew's daily live hits, and I hope he continues to do them. Because I think it's a great way to engage. And I think that the NDP, that was one criticism I would have, is that they haven't been doing as much with like live streaming as like Bernie and AOC and the other American, like the leftists have done. We need to be doing more. Nikki Ashton's been doing more live streaming. Jagmeet's been doing them. I think we need to see more of that because I think it's important. One thing to note, no hard commitment yet, but Matthew and I are likely planning to do an interview sometime soon. Maybe next week. He'll be coming on the channel. I think we have a rough date and time linked down. And then also I might be doing one of his live streams. So his 3 o'clock live streams. I may be a guest on one in the not too distant future. But again, we're still working out the kinks on that. So definitely a fan of Matthew Green and his outreach. David Molina, I don't know. I don't see a comment or question, but David Molina with the support there. Thank you for the super chat, David. Thank you so much. We're carrying signs now. It says, wasn't Ford crack smoking mayor like a mayor version of our Hunter Biden? No, that's the thing. Doug Ford had a brother, Rob Ford. Rob Ford was mayor of Toronto, from like 2014, I think, to 2010 to 2014 or something. I'm not exactly sure from when to when. And then he had a brother, Doug Ford. And Doug Ford was a city councilor when his brother was mayor. And then his brother passed away, and then Doug ended up becoming the leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservatives. There's progressive in the name, but there's nothing progressive about them. but the Ontario Progressive Conservatives and would become premier. Now, Doug Ford does have a legacy of, I mean, I don't know if like there's legal. Some people have suggested through allegations that when he was younger, he dealt drugs, but he doesn't have the same image of substance abuse that his brother has at a personal level. Fembot, I don't know the exact, or Femibot, that you were saying that you guys were right, I was wrong, and then somebody, who said it here? Common Internet says, but now you know, knowing is half the battle. So look at that. That's great. That's great. I love that people are having productive, constructive discussions in the chat. Admitting when you're wrong and is rare, and then somebody when they're right being gracious about it is also rare. So I'm happy to see that. Happy to see that. We're carrying signs now, says, with the super chat, thank you, saying, thank you, Christo. Love the show. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. I love having you all you guys here. Yeah, Kathy makes a great point that, like, as much as, you know, thanks to Jagmeet and, like, unions and other people raising the issues, there's still a lot of people left out of the aid packages. As she notes, still nothing in Canada for people who were unemployed before coronavirus. These people can't even go out for job interviews. They are struggling too. So just as a reminder, the way the Canadian package works is when it was originally set up to access it, you needed to have lost your job and be making no income, but you needed to have the job on a certain date. I believe it was March 15th. If you were unemployed before then you didn't get any help, even if you were looking for a job. Also, you had to have made $5,000 in the previous year. So let's say you were a part-time worker, you didn't get help, or you were a student who just got your first real job, quote unquote, and you were starting to make money and you got laid off, but you hadn't made $5,000 in the previous year, you'd be left with nothing. And so some of these improvements have come. Again, Jagmeet Singh's goal has been a universal payment for everyone who needs it, but the Liberals have sort of compromised and said, okay, if you've lost your income but you make if you make more than zero but less than 1,000, you can get help. And they've expanded it with the student program, but they're still leaving out people that don't have jobs. And the reality is that a lot of people, whether they had a job lined up or whether they were in between jobs, have basically been rendered unemployable because for the most part, there's not enough jobs. There are some areas that are hiring, but not enough to absorb all the people that are looking for jobs. And it's not feasible for people to travel for a job because travel is discouraged right now. Craig is saying, who is the podcast with? I don't want to say right now. They are another creator, but they are not necessarily known for making strictly political content. So it'll be a bit interesting. You might know who they are. You might not. They are, so we'll hear about that when it comes. Yes, Andrew Skipsey has a great comment here saying the U.S. equivalent to the Rebel would be like Breitbart. That's a great comparison. They'd be like Breitbart is a good one, or like with a bit of like PragerU, with a bit of Ben Shapiro, with a bit of a Crowder, like that general community, like. In some way, like sometimes they try to go for like that, like right-wing intellectualism. They also have some, like you might say that they have some, like they're probably loosely connected to the Jordan Peterson type project as well. Like that level of right-wing. Another one is like InfoWars. They are like InfoWars, but they've like InfoWars has sort of been forced off a lot of mainstream platforms. Rebel hasn't. Yeah, people mentioning Breitbart and stuff, that's definitely a good comparison, I would say. JCU says, I was planning to move to Canada. You guys are talking me out of it. Look, I mean, Canada's a great country. Or more accurately, Canada sucks like most Western colonialist countries do. Because, I mean, to the extent that we're good, we took a lot of it from Indigenous people. But, I mean, Canada's a decent country to live in. There are a lot of issues, however. If I was very poor, yeah, I'd much rather live in Canada than the United States. But life for our poorest people is still awful. You don't have dental care. You don't get your medicine covered. Social assistance is really bad. Our minimum wages in most of the provinces are far too low. Education is still too expensive. There's so many flaws in Canada that we deal with. Housing is very expensive pretty much everywhere, but especially in the places where the jobs actually are. Like there are a lot of issues to Canada. It's better than the United States, but not so much better that like all of this like fawning for Canada is justified. Brendan C says, we're carrying signs now. I have never heard anything about that because I don't think Canada ever colonized anywhere. Well, one thing to understand, much like the United States, is that the country itself is a project of colonialism, both during the British colonial period and in both Canada and the United States, the French colonial period, and even to some degree the Spanish colonial period. But even after each country became like its own country, whether the 1770s, 1780s in the United States or 1867 in Canada, even after that, like whether it's Manifest Destiny or whether it was the settlement of the prairies in Canada, the establishment of both countries was a project of colonialism to displace Indigenous people. 100%. In a direct sense, Canada has not had colonies in like the in the imperial sense. Like in the way that, say, like Britain or France or even the United States with the Philippines and things like that, or Hawaii. We don't have that. But Canada has played a role as an ally to the colonial projects of Britain and the United States. There was a time where in the post-war period, Canada, and I don't think we deserved this, actually. I don't think we deserved it. But there was a sense that Canada was like a good country for international relations because we were trusted by the global colonial powers, France, England, United States, etc. But we didn't have a direct colonial legacy in the way those imperial countries did. We didn't have overseas territories. Canada didn't own any land in Africa. We didn't have any islands that we claimed in the same way. But Canada is 100% a colonial country. The rebel media is a type of people who would have voted Maxime Bernier. Brandon C., you're right, but a lot of them probably vote conservative. Their audience, frankly, is too big to only be PPCers. Like a lot, and at different times, some conservative politicians, not PPCers, but conservatives, have associated with the rebel and people from the rebel. So it's to the right of the conservatives. I don't want to suggest that the rebel media and the Conservative Party have a similar platform, because they don't. But there are a lot of conservative MPs that have had close relationships with elements of rebel media. Andrew Skipsey makes the point that it's not so much about arming the left to take over the state, but to prevent a right-wing takeover. I mean, that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. I'll think about that. Joseph says that in his home state, New Jersey, Danny DeVito did a fundraiser. It's great to see. Danny DeVito's been a good supporter of Bernie back in 2016 as well. It's fantastic to see. It's great to see because his character on It's Always Sunny is like the biggest right-wing ghoul, and like, you know, him in real life, he's such a good guy. He's a good guy. Matt Lipton says not in the last few terrorist attacks in Canada were right-wing attacks. I can't think of a high-profile left-wing terrorist attack, I guess, since the FLQ. You know, whether you want to classify them as legitimately left-wing or not is an interesting question. I mean, certainly the writings of the FLQ were influenced by the left, and it has to be remembered that some of the FLQ leaders got exiled to Cuba. And they picked Cuba, obviously, for a reason. They didn't go to Rhodesia or South Africa, right? Like they clearly went to Cuba. And so that might have been Canada's last, like, left-wing terrorist thing. But even then, I believe only 1 or 2 people lost their lives. Not to diminish it, but it's nothing compared to the Polytechnic affair, where there was basically a misogynistic effort. Quebec City, you know, things like that. I don't know if this man in question has ideological leanings, like maybe, he dressed like a cop. Maybe he's like, you know, like this like militaristic like fantasy. I don't know. I don't want to speculate. But most of Canada's high profile things in this regard have generally been either sort of apolitical or on the right, you know, on the right. Very few of them have been on the left. Doug notes that they were preparing a police emergency alert. Yes, Doug, I do know that, but it's just this took a long time. This man, Nova Scotia is not that big of a province. Like, it's in the grand scheme, if you look at Nova Scotia, it's not a big province, but the man traveled up for a long time, and some people were wondering that this took place over a long enough period that there might have been time to offer a warning earlier. Roman says, with a super chat, he says, and thank you so much for the support, Roman. And he says, at what point do we say Bernie's lack of action to stand up for himself against the corporate Dems isn't him getting cheated, but just complicity? I mean, that's a good question. I feel still that Bernie Sanders, I'm not going to be like turning on Bernie. I do think it's fair to note where Bernie made mistakes. Bernie should have hit Biden harder. Okay. So, sorry about that, guys. My internet is being really bad. Okay, so I'm back. I'm going to go with his question by Roman here. So somebody notes here, Doug Grinberg said, stuck at Bernie, should have hit Biden. Sorry again, I resetted my internet. Somebody's saying, Joseph Willis says, Revenue Canada and Kingston uploading unemployment checks, leaving no bandwidth for Christo. Okay, I'm back. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So, Bernie should have hit back at Biden. Whether it's because he was friends with Biden or not, it's not a good enough excuse. Not a good enough excuse at all. Now, we have proof that I think this worked, at least from my perspective, because Bernie hit Biden with Social Security like a couple weeks before Iowa, And then Biden's numbers collapsed. We all remember this, right? Do you remember this, guys? Where Biden basically came out or Bernie said, like, Biden's wanted to, at multiple points in his career, cut or freeze Social Security in a way that will hurt working class people. And the clips were unambiguous. And Biden lied about it. And then he, all of that, right? And that's what Biden around that time did, this whole why thing. And it was just like Biden was on the ropes. And then Iowa happened and he got walloped. And then New Hampshire happened and he got walloped even harder. Finished third in Nevada, but a distant third, right? Or second in Nevada, but a distant second. And what Bernie should have done, especially after South Carolina, is gone hard at Biden, kept going at Biden on Social Security. Bernie, see, that's the thing. Bernie did go at Biden. He did. He just stopped doing it. He stopped going at Biden, and I think that was a real mistake. Now, does that make Bernie complicit? I don't know. It means Bernie certainly made some errors. And I know that within his campaign, we're hearing that there was a lot of debate about what Bernie should do. Should Bernie attack Biden harder, or should he be more, collegial? And I think the reason, the fact that there was debate within the campaign leads me to believe that Bernie wasn't complicit, but that there was just real fundamental disagreement about the strategy. And I think Bernie was wrong, but I don't think that means he was crooked or that he was selling out. Necessarily, right? And I mean, Samantha Sider has a good point here when she says that, Bernie had to be extra careful. Fair or unfair, like unfair as it is, the reality was that Bernie didn't get away with attacking folks in the same way that Biden did, right? And I think that's really important. That because the mainstream media was against him, Bernie had to realize that whenever he made an attack, he had to factor in the torrent of anti-Bernie media that would come. John Barlich says, I'm going to get the super chat, says, what do you think about Trump halting immigration? I think it's bad. I think that, to the certain degree that certain processes of immigration need to be halted or modified during this time, I think is reasonable. Much like how people can't travel in or out of the country generally, there are going to be restrictions, but this sort of ban on immigration, I don't think is a good idea. And again, I think it's a distraction. The biggest factor in spread is not immigration, it's density and the people that already have it. And it sort of misses the mark. It misses the mark about what's causing this. And again, it allows Trump to make it a wedge issue. Everyone's pressing F for the stream. We're back, though. We're back. Yeah, somebody is saying I got DD. I got DOSed or DDoS. Yeah. Everyone happy I'm back. That's great to see. Why? Yeah, people are loving that. Can you believe that guy won? Can you believe it? I still sometimes can't believe it that Biden's the nominee. I can't believe it. Kelly M. Bernie Nina 2020 says, I think the DNC screwed with green votes in 2016. No one I knew or in large Reddit groups voted Hillary Clinton. Now that burners are saying they're voting green, I'll bet the DNC is working overtime to rig green votes again. I mean, I don't know if the votes were rigged. You can't specifically rig. I don't know if they rigged Green Party votes. I'm not sure if that's what happened. What happened in 2016 was election rigging in the United States is predominantly done before the ballots are cast. Rigging happens when black people are systematically denied the right to vote. Rigging happens when prisoners aren't allowed to vote. That's vote rig. Bernie's the only one that wants to allow that. Rigging happens when college campuses get one polling station for 40,000 students. That's rigging. Beyond that, I can't make a claim that systematically Hillary Clinton stole green votes in 2016. I don't know about that. A lot of people didn't voted Hillary Clinton. A lot of Greens did that probably because Greens aren't going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I'm guessing a lot of them won't vote for Biden either. John Bartlett says, who will be the next Bernie? It's a good question. In terms of like what Bernie represents in American politics, you might not get another Bernie for 30 years because Bernie is not only like the left-wing guy running for president, but he represents a certain like legacy of progressivism. And so the next Bernie might be somebody 30 years from now who's in their 30s or 40s, right? Like a young politician. In terms of the next person who's going to like run for the Democratic leadership, who's going to run for, a position like that, I think it might be Rashida Tlaib. It might be Ilhan Omar. In terms of president, see, it's tricky. Ilhan Omar is really great, so is Jayapal, but both of them are not born U.S. citizens and ineligible for president. I think AOC can certainly play that role, or at least has the potential to. Or, it might be somebody we haven't heard of yet. Somebody could come out of nowhere. I'm not sure. But I think there's a much deeper bench now. Don't sleep on Nina Turner. I think Nina Turner or Brianna Joy Gray on their own could have political careers. I'm not, you haven't seen the last of Joy Gray or Nina Turner. That's for sure. The question is like whether or not they are going to take a direct role as candidates or whether their role is going to be more in movement building. That remains to be seen. But don't sleep on them. Samantha Sider says, I won't give money to the DNC or the DCCC. I gave my recurring donation to Bernie for Bernie to Shahid Buttar. That's great. Certainly, if back in 2016, even if I would have voted for Clinton, my God, I wouldn't have volunteered for her. I wouldn't have donated to her. And frankly, I would have still made videos that were critical of her. Or I didn't make YouTube videos at the time, but I was writing critical things about her. I would certainly never have given them my money. My God, no. Your money is much better spent, frankly. One, because I don't believe in Joe Biden, but two, your, say, $10 donation, $20 donation on the presidential level is minuscule, but in a local race, Shahid Buttar is going to benefit so much more from your recurring donation than Joe Biden will. And you'll be doing your part to help unseat Pelosi. So if you are making donations to Bernie and you still have the money and you're and you want to find a cause, find a progressive that you believe in and support them. Maybe it's the municipal level or the local level. Maybe it's Rashida Tlaib, who's in a close primary challenge, or Shahid Buttar, who is going to have it's an uphill battle to replace Pelosi, but he can do it. But he's going to need your help. And so, if you can give him a few bucks, that'd be great. And you'll probably have a massive impact giving just a little bit of money to some of these smaller candidates. Ben Riley says with a super chat, thank you so much, Ben, for your support. Before I go to sleep, I just wanted to wish you luck. And even though I'm not religious, I'll still pray for you guys after such a tragedy. Ben, thank you so much for your thoughts and prayers. Look, we can all pray. Prayer is not just, a strictly religious thing. Like Bernie said, Bernie always noted that his spiritualism is there's a spirit, there's an essence that connects us all. And it's when you hurt, I hurt. And I think in a moment like this, your thoughts and prayers is great to have. I think that matters. And I think people can feel that. Lonnie McVeigh says, I'm still supporting Bernie's movement, not the campaign. 100% reasonable. And here's the thing. It's not just Bernie's movement. Bernie's a big part of it. Without Bernie, maybe it doesn't happen. But Bernie himself has said, not me, us. It's not his movement, it's our movement. Right? And the movement didn't start or even end with Bernie winning. Look, a lot of people on the left were I can't wait to protest President Sanders. And that's what makes the left, like, it sometimes mean we do too much infighting. Sometimes it makes it hard to organize, but it's what makes us different from the Trumpers and the Biden Clinton crew. Because do you remember in the first days of the Trump regime, when there was that lady holding up the sign saying, if Clinton were president, we'd be at brunch? That is why American politics were broken. Because when a standard neoliberal was in power, many middle-class people just stopped caring or just assumed everything was fine. Same thing in Canada. Not enough people are protesting Justin Trudeau. Indigenous people are, environmentalists are, the left is, young people are. But like regular middle-class folks are like, I'm fine, I got mine, everyone else can F off, right? And like, if Bernie became president, we'd all be happy and celebrating, but I guarantee you, when Bernie started to like make mistakes, there would have been protests against Bernie from Bernie supporters. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. One, because no one is perfect and no one is above criticism. But two, you have to keep the pressure on. One, to remind Bernie why he would be in the White House. But two, you want to demonstrate to the public and to the media and to the powers that be that you're powerful. And that gives Bernie more credence to heed you. Because Bernie will say, well, look at these powerful protests. I have to do something. But yeah, that's what would have made this movement special, and it still makes it special. A lot of people are now saying, like, where's the movement go after Bernie? And there was a great article in The Onion, and you know, The Onion's satire, it's jokes, but sometimes their jokes tell a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth in the jokes. And they basically said, like, Bernie Sanders, Bernie's campaign moves on without candidate. They're still going to run for president. We'll figure out with who later. Which is to say that, like, Bernie might be moving to Biden, but Bernie's people aren't ready yet, or at least a lot of them aren't. And I think that's clearly the case. John Bartlett says, which progressives should be paying attention to the futures? In terms of which progressives we should be paying attention to, I think like AOC, Omar, Tlaib are going to be great leaders, I think. You're going to want to also look at Ro Khanna. I know that sometimes he's a little bit less on the left than some of the rest, but he was a good Bernie soldier. There's some issues apparently where he might be roped into this like stock selling scandal. Although the information I've seen about him isn't as blatant as it is about some of the Republican and Democratic senators. You're going to want to also look at, again, like, I don't know, Nina Turner and Brianna Joy Gray are superstars in the making. A lot of the Bernie staffers, frankly, who are going out on their own right now, like a lot of them are going to be leaders. You're going to want to look at like local folks like Kashama. I can't say her name, but she's the Seattle city councilor who almost lost, but then ended up winning on the comeback. And like basically all the corporations in Seattle tried to overthrow her, and she still won. You want to look at Lee Carter in Virginia. And then there are probably lots of folks that I'm not even thinking about, like folks that I don't even know. And like a lot of these people at the local levels are potentially at least the sort of people that can rise to the challenge of running for Senate, running for Congress, maybe running for president. And I think that's what we should be looking for like the next progressives. James Gardner says, do you think the NDP hasn't been good enough with pushing to the public how they've pulled the Liberals to expand the pandemic benefits? I mean, certainly parties can always do better at communicating, and I think that the NDP needs to better harness live streaming and viral media to do that. On the other hand, I think it is a fundamental issue with the Canadian media space where it is even more homogenous than the American media. The American media has much bigger like alternative media sources on the left and right than Canada. And it means that the mainstream media is a much bigger gatekeeper in Canada as a proportion. Like, our mainstream media is so much more dominant than the American mainstream media. You guys have more mainstream media sources, so they compete with one another, at least ostensibly. In Canada, there's really only 3 major sources, and really only 2 as much. Global is not as big as CTV. Like, the reality is that when the media doesn't mention it. And another challenge in Canada is that for whatever reason, Canadians have a much bigger faith in mainstream media than the United States does. There's more distrust of media south of the border than there is here in Canada. Now, that means that it's harder to go get through a lot of these things. It's harder to convince people that the media is lying, or the media is lying by omission in Canada, because there's a greater fundamental trust of the media. And in Canada as well, people on the left, or on the center left at least, trust the media even more than people on the center right do. And so, much like in the United States, there's a lot of people who voted in the Democratic primary still fundamentally trust CNN, MSNBC, and other mainstream media outlets, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and on and on and on and on. Like, the educated middle-class progressive still trusts the media, the average one at least. And so that's a fundamental barrier. And in Canada, without a lot of alternative media, and much of the left alternative media is anti-NDP or is skeptical of the NDP, sometimes with reason, but I think often due to sectarianism, it makes it very difficult. Singh has been getting a little bit more coverage over the past few days, and social media has been recognizing him more and more, but I do think it's a fundamental issue. It's one of the things I want to do more. It's just, when I made Canadian content, it didn't get the amount of views, and I'm trying to build a channel here that I can, build a sustainable, audience and business, and it's hard to do that on purely Canadian content. And another factor is, it's very challenging to break through that Canadian media wall. John Barlich again, thank you so much, John, for all your great contributions and questions. He says, I think progressives should make a go for executive positions like governor in the future. Your thoughts? I mean, I agree. I think in general, it's a good idea to make a move at the local level. This isn't to say don't try for bigger offices, but it is to say that if you want to build a new party especially, or if you want to build like a progressive caucus, like, you need to do so like on a regional basis. You need to find those beachheads. That's how the NDP, the CCF NDP got formed in Canada. It first started as a party strong in the West, and then would eventually grow to be a more national party. And that's like an important factor. It'll be much easier in some ways to win a governorship than to win a presidency. And even if you look at it, if you look at the Progressive Caucus in the United States, in the Congress, first of all, I wouldn't say all of those people are progressive. Some of them I don't necessarily think are, but they identify as progressive. Many of the good Congress people are in there, but if you look, Bernie Sanders is the only senator in the Progressive Caucus. There's a lot more Congress people. And I think one of the reasons is that generally it's easier to get, to find districts where a lot of progressives live and target your efforts to elect Congress people there, or find a progressive state and elect a progressive governor there. That's, I think, where you can get a lot done. It's great to see just Adalbert Red and FemiBot both became members of the channel. Guys, thank you so much. I very much appreciate that. The ongoing support to the channel is going to be a great help. Thank you so much. Corn Pop is a bad dude, Lonnie McVeigh says. I heard he ran a bunch of bad boys who were indeed a bad crew. People just bring these things up, guys, and honestly, it's like, I forgot about Corn Pop for a little bit. Yeah, Kashama Sawant, thank you so much for letting me know, Simon. It's late. I was trying to remember what it was. A lot of people are saying AOC has been disappointing, but there were a few things. One, she's been fighting hard on a lot of policies. She was the first person in Congress. She was still too slow, but she was the first person in Congress to even acknowledge Tara Reade. And her acknowledgement was much better, frankly, than what we saw from Bernie or anybody else. She basically said that the Democratic Party is being hypocritical and ignoring this. Whereas Bernie had this loose, she has the right to speak and people have the right to believe her or not believe her, which was very weak, I think. AOC's been also leading by example. She's been delivering food to people in New York. And I still like AOC, and I still think she has the potential. Now, is there a chance that she could be corrupted? Of course there is. But I haven't given up on her yet. I also like Rashida Tlaib a lot. In some ways, Rashida Tlaib maybe is a little bit more consistent than AOC. I also want to thank all the moderators. We've made a few more people moderators last week, and it's been really helpful at clearing up the channel of spam and of people who are spreading hateful ideology and slurs that dehumanize people. So I want to thank you guys for doing that. Katie Porter, I know she was a Warren supporter, but if the goal is to move the American Senate to the left, certainly Ro Khanna or Katie Porter would both be improvements over Feinstein. Yes, 100%. Ludo fan says that they're a Republican and they follow my channel attentively. Need to hear all sides. And Christo Aivalis, you are super transparent and I appreciate you. Well, thank you so much. I very much appreciate that. Again, everyone's welcome at this channel to watch and to engage in the content. Most of my viewership are on the left, of course. I think that makes sense given my viewpoints and what I cover, but not everyone is. Some people have told me they identify more as centrists or that they're, conservatives or what have you. And, for the most part, I think that's great. A lot of people are, when we're on these streams, the people that tend to be trolls tend to be on the right, but that there are a lot of people who don't identify with my brand of politics who have nonetheless become mainstays on the channel. And I very much appreciate that. And I think that, one of my goals here is to say, I have a bias. I'm clear about that bias. If you don't like that, that's fine. There's other content. But, within my bias, I try to do the best job I can. Dan Cordobine makes a great point. It's like if you can win even a city council seat in the Amazon's hometown, that means there's a potential for other victories. And some local victories have been really important. If you look at where a lot of policies have happened, it's at the local level. A local $15 an hour minimum wage is fights and other municipal fights, municipal broadband. A lot of these policies have been really good. Now the challenge is going to be in right-wing states with left-wing cities. A lot of governors and state legislatures have basically made it illegal for cities to raise the minimum wage. And so I think the left has to think municipally, but the state houses are very important. Doug Grinberg says that seems Shahid Buttar would benefit from Trump attack on Pelosi. He's talking about the Donald Trump ad with the Pelosi loving her ice cream while people are struggling with the coronavirus crisis. I agree. It's hard for Buttar. He can't necessarily talk about that ad because then it's going to look like he's boosting Trump to hurt Pelosi. But, Buttar has weighed in because before that Trump ad came out, people were ripping Pelosi about her ice cream, and then he shared a thing on social media where it's like, here's my freezer. And it's like a freezer that any regular person would have. Standard, fridge, small freezer on the top of your fridge, regular people stuff in there, just food, sort of like not packed to the brim, nothing crazy, local, like the just standard stuff, right? And I think that was a good image. I don't know if it's going to help him. It's certainly not going to hurt him. Environmental Canadian says, Christo, the CBC has faults for sure, but we at least have a national broadcaster that is better than any corporate U.S. media. I mean, I would generally agree. The CBC does provide an invaluable service, and in a time where the market ideology around news, right? Like the former market ideology, which is that like, we only make news where it's profitable. Like either you sell subscriptions or you sell ads. If you can't sell subscriptions or ads, the news doesn't get made. Having a public broadcaster that's not being driven, at least directly, by profit motives is a good thing. My problem with the CBC is that I do find that they tend to not give fair coverage to the NDP, but that's the case with most media, right? And so I don't know if it's a function of the CBC itself, but I think it's actually more like who tends to get jobs at the CBC are people that are more likely to be liberals and maybe conservatives because they're higher income jobs in some cases. They come from highly exclusive backgrounds. Often these people are well connected in their personal lives, and that tends to lead to coverage that is naturally hostile to a party that is more connected to unions and the working class. But yeah, I don't want to suggest the CBC is bad, but I do. But my point is, Environmental Canadian, is that you make a good point, but it's also illustrative that you fundamentally believe the CBC is a good thing. So do I. So do most NDPers. In fact, there would be no party more willing to give the CBC even more money, and yet the CBC either ignores or ridicules the NDP. And so that's a challenge, right? The CBC is irreplaceable. We need it. But it does not give good coverage to the people that would actually help the CBC. And so it puts us in a tricky position. And it means that here in Canada, if you want to produce independent left-wing media on YouTube, it's harder because while a lot of progressives don't trust MSNBC, CNN, even PBS or NPR, in Canada, a lot of progressives still trust the CBC. Yeah, Nathan Drake notes that my dad listens to NPR, CBC, and BBC. He is a liberal, but he trusts publicly funded over commercial media. Yeah, I mean, those sources are good, right? But the BBC was rigged against Corbyn. The BBC's coverage was unfair to Corbyn. And not as bad, but the coverage we've seen from PBS and NPR at times was falling into the same anti-Bernie tropes that corporate media. Now, the motivations might be different, but based less on raw economic ideology and more, again, on who are the sorts of people that get the top jobs at these organizations and what kind of person would they back, right? Like Warren was loved by a lot of these types because Warren was really popular with a certain subset of highly educated, like middle-class professional managerial people, right? Whereas Bernie and Biden, to his credit, is one of the reasons why Bernie struggled. Bernie and Biden were far more successful at winning over folks that didn't have university degrees, working class people, right? Different audiences. Biden gets corporate media support not because the media elites identify with him, but because the economic interests are the same. With Warren, they loved her because they saw themselves in Warren, you know? Doug Grinberg's Christo, right for HuffPost Canada. I've written a couple pieces for them over the years, but it was back when I was still in academia, like full in a full manner. And at the time, I didn't mind doing the occasional free writing because I saw it as part of academic outreach. I haven't written for them. I'm always willing to write for outlets that will pay me to write. Because now I have a son and things like that. So I want to write in a manner that gets paid. I'm not opposed to writing for them. I think I've done more recent areas I've written for. I've written for the Washington Post, who, ironic as it is, are some of the best people at covering left-wing issues in Canada, because they will publish things the Canadian newspapers won't. So like Nora Loretto, David Moskrop, they write for Washington Post. I've written for them. They'll publish pieces we can't publish at mainstream outlets in Canada. I've written for the Globe and Mail. I did a piece for them. I've written for Maclean's. I have also written for Canadian Dimension. They're great. Passage is a new left-wing website, sort of like a Jacobin for Canada. They're great. And so I'm always willing to do more writing. It's hard right now because with my son here, I barely have enough time to make these videos, but it's something that I'm really looking forward to doing, at least at some point, is to get into writing more and help it be part of this general freelancing bit I'm doing. John Bartlett says biggest disappointment was Warren. I would agree, John. And I mean, I'm disappointed because I was never sold on Warren as good as Bernie, as being as good as Bernie. Never, ever. But I did think for a moment, I'm like, she would be a decent second choice. Maybe she could be Bernie's VP. Maybe, like, if not VP because she's also old and from the same part of the country, but like play a massive role in Bernie's cabinet. But then as the election went on, she really like, I became so disillusioned with her. And like the other candidates, I can't be disappointed with Pete Buttigieg. I knew he was a rat, like at the beginning. I can't be disappointed with Kamala Harris or Amy Klobuchar. I knew they were bad, but I could be disappointed with Warren because I thought she was better than what she ended up being, right? That's why I was disappointed. Rich says, Dr. Aivalis, thanks for allowing us to communicate openly on your platform. Your moderators are doing a great job deleting obvious trolls. Good work, guys. Your indomitable spirit is inspirational. Fantastic words, Rich. Thank you so much for the super chat and the wonderful comments to the people that are taking time moderating. I very much appreciate everyone who does it. It's one thing that really helps to improve the quality of the stream for everybody. And I'm happy that people feel they can communicate openly. Again, the people that I've asked to moderate, I trust very much that they're not to delete posts that are disagreeing with me or the left or what have you, but that, they are to facilitate good discussion. And when people are trolling and spamming and saying hurtful things, then that doesn't make it a safe space for everyone to have discussion. Either a discussion that agrees with me and the crowd or disagrees with it. Probably especially disagrees with it. Sophie Faraday says, please talk more about Canadian politics. I like it. Thank you so much, with a $4.20 donation, which is maybe more than a coincidence. I might infer. So thank you so much, Sophie. I definitely want to talk more about Canadian politics. It's something I do on every live stream. The challenge with making Canadian content is the YouTube space is really small, Canada's YouTube footprint is very small, and it makes it difficult to get content seen. And much like with American content, YouTube prioritizes official news sources. But I find that whereas the U.S. media market is so big that even if YouTube gives an edge to Fox, MSNBC, CNN, and all of them, there's still enough of a pie for us to talk about it. With the Canadian media, it seems like the CBC Global and CTV eat up the entire pie. As a perspective, in the first year of this channel, I didn't do only Canadian politics, but I did mostly Canadian politics. I got about 1 million views. In the past month, where I've been focusing more on Bernie and the American left, I got 1 million views in 1 month alone. And so it's really a balance of what I find passionate, what I can speak about, but also what people want to watch, right? Like that's one of the, I wanted to make YouTube videos because I wanted to make content that people engaged with, right? And like I was in academia and academic work's important, but you write papers and not a lot of people read them, even when they're good papers. And it's like, if I wanted to write something or make something that 200 people would watch, I would just write academic articles for peer-reviewed journals. But if you want to make like a massive impact, you have to make content people want to see. So, the Canadian scene is much more suited to my writing and is much more suited to my social media, like my Twitter, and is much more suited to podcasting. There's a lot more Canadian podcasts. Podcasts work on a different model. With YouTube, volume is the biggest thing. On podcasting, brand loyalty and like listener loyalty can carry you over the hump in some ways, right? And that's why there's a lot more Canadian podcasts. Like there's Alberta Advantage, 49th Parahell, Dog Island. There's Michael and Us is a Canadian podcast. There's so many. I can't even say them all right now. Unpacking the News, Sandy and Nora, and none of these people have YouTube channels. And it's just that YouTube is hard for a Canadian focused channel. John Barla, Jessica, historical what if? What if Lincoln wasn't assassinated? That's a great question. I mean, that's a really broad one, right? That could be a whole live stream. But I think like one thing is that like maybe he's not seen as great as he was. Because one of the reasons he's probably seen as like this great president is because he was assassinated right after the Civil War. So he kind of went down as this hero. He won the war, united the country, ended slavery, and then was assassinated by somebody who hated Lincoln for the good things he did. And then he went down forever as this legendary hero. And you wonder, what if he served out his whole term and made bad decisions, made controversial decisions, sold out freed African-American people. One of his plans, he was a supporter, at least in general, of basically removing all African Americans from the United States. He also didn't necessarily support, at least for some of his life, the right of black people to vote. He opposed slavery, but he wasn't 100% certain about the citizenship question. And if some of these issues would have played out over Lincoln's full term and in his post-presidential life, his legacy might have been more complicated, right? I don't know, but maybe the post-war Reconstruction period is more stable with Lincoln. I don't know what the alternative is. You could also argue that the Grant presidency, which like followed his, would have been different. Grant spent a lot of time on America's international relationship after he was president. If he doesn't get to be president because of Lincoln, then like how does that change, right? Like I don't know what the answer is, frankly. But it's a massive change. It's a massive change. But I think the one I could certainly talk about is Lincoln's legacy likely becomes more complicated because the contradictions after the war would obviously complicate the legacy of anyone who was president at the time. Ezoro says all 6 major news outlets are owned by the 1% of corporate establishment, which espoused infotainment, disinformation, and war propaganda to 90% of Americans. Yes, certainly. Here in Canada, though, we have the CBC, which is good. Again, it's not like an awful source. We have Global and we have CTV. For television media, those are the only 3 national. We only have 3 national media sources here in Canada. They're all Global and CTV. I would classify as center-right. All the newspapers in Canada are center-right or right-wing, except for the Toronto Star, which is centrist. Some people think it's left-wing because it's being compared to other newspapers, but it's the only. Every newspaper in this country is right-wing. Every like national paper or major regional paper. We have the same issues here, and that it's a big deal. Dude Man asks, I am far left. I'm a weird cross between democratic socialism / libertarian socialist / communist. Where are you on the spectrum, and what's your opinion of the far left? Do you see them as allies? Well, I mean, dude, man, I would classify myself, at least in electoral terms, as far left, I guess. Like, in the sense that, like, I'm well to the left of Bernie. I'm well to the left of the NDP. If there was a politician that held my views in a sense, it would be Jeremy Corbyn, who I think is somewhat similar to me. And I don't think Corbyn's far left, actually, but I'm a believer that we have to more fundamentally challenge capitalism. That when Bernie says socialism, he mostly means good social programs. But when I say socialism, I mean state ownership of mass industry and the commanding heights, worker ownership of all but the smallest businesses, worker and cooperative ownership. Small businesses can be individually owned, but even that should have some kind of cooperative mandate, maybe owner co-op, almost like farmers are independent business people, but they'd be organized into cooperatives. And universal social programs guaranteeing the basic dignities of life to every person, no matter what. That's my definition of a socialist society or a democratic socialist society. In terms of like the far, far left, I mean, some of them I disagree with their tactics. Sometimes I feel that their rejection of electoral politics only empowers the right, because the far right, the far, far, far right still gets out and votes for Trump. They eventually want to destroy the democratic state and implement a fascist regime. At least some of them do. But they'll still vote to move the goalposts towards that direction, whereas many on the far left in Canada and the United States won't vote for the NDP or anyone really, and it sort of puts us at a disadvantage. But I don't see them as like enemies. And frankly, like the amount of people that are more left-wing than me it's infinitesimal. So like these far left movements are so tiny that I don't really pay them too much mind, if I'm being honest, right? That's my viewpoint. So I'm just going to try to quickly go down to the list here because we're running a little bit closer to 11, but we did have a couple of stream issues today, so I wanted to give you guys a little bit more time given the technical difficulties. Yeah, Craig Adolph makes a great point that Winnipeg is one of the only remaining major independent newspapers in Canada. It's not really a left-wing newspaper. It's got Dylan, what's his last name? They have some good. I've done some interviews with some of their journalists. It's not a bad source, but it's not like a left-wing source either. But you're right. There's been a lot of media conglomeration in Canada. Basically, in terms of like notable papers, there's the Toronto Star. Then there's like some regional papers like La Presse in Montreal and the Winnipeg Free Press. But for the most part, most of our newspapers are owned by Post Media, which is National Post, but they also own all of these regional newspapers. So the Kingston Whig Standard used to be an independent paper. Kingston's an old town in Canada. It's from the early 1800s. It's an older city right on Lake Ontario, and its only newspaper is owned by this conglomerate, and it still has its old name. But it was it's like a zombie paper, right? Most of the content is just filtered through the National Post media conglomerate. John Barlich asks, who would win, Obama or Trump in 2008? Well, what Trump is running? Like, Trump in 2008 did he still believe in universal health care? Did he still think the Iraq war was wrong? Did he still like Nancy Pelosi? I think it's a hard question because, like, what was Trump in 2008? Hypothetically, though, if we take 2016 Trump and throw him in place for McCain, so instead of Obama Biden versus McCain Palin, it's Obama Biden versus Trump Pence. I think Obama still wins. Trump wins in a very unique circumstance. Like, after the crisis where even on the left and the right, there was distrust of the status quo. Before 2008, that distrust on the right hadn't baked in yet. Trump likely doesn't happen after a Republican regime. There was a racist reaction. Not everyone. I don't want to pay. No, if you're voting for Trump in 2020, I gotta say, like, it's hard to overlook the Trump racism. Back in 2016, though, there was a lot of people who weren't necessarily voting for Trump for the racism. But there were some people for who Trump was the response to a black man being president. That Obama's not president yet in 2008. And so my perspective is that Obama wins that election pretty handily. He wins that election pretty handily. I don't see Trump denting that victory. It's such a massive victory too. So even if you think Trump does better than McCain, he'd have to do a lot better than McCain. A lot better. We're carrying signs now, says any honest news source would be appreciated. Well, you know, some of those podcast dimensions, are good. There's Ricochet in Canada, Canadian Dimension. There's Rank and File. There is the Rank and File Prairie Edition radio show with Emily Leadham. There's the Briar Patch. There's the T. There's all sorts of smaller outlets in Canada that are like trustworthy sources. Like the CBC. The CBC is a good source. Their political analysts, their political coverage, I think, is biased against the left. I really do. Like, for instance, the CBC, when there were like 300,000 people protesting in Montreal on World Climate Day, covered it. But they gave more coverage to like 150 people driving trucks from Alberta to Ottawa to demand the pipeline get built faster, the tar sand pipeline. And like that got equivalent coverage. And so the CBC gave much more coverage to the far right than they did to like almost a million Canadians nationwide protesting climate change and demanding climate action back when in September, I believe. It was September or whatever. I forget when it was exactly. But you know what I mean? It was this summer and fall, just before the election. And that's an example. But the CBC in general gives good coverage. Like, they're reliable, like with getting the facts right and getting stories from across the country, right? Dude Man says, I appreciate that response, man. Thanks. I agree with you largely. I think voting is easy way to make change, but that our focus should be on organizing. Certainly. It's not either or. Like, it's not either or. Like, you got to do that on the ground organizing if you want to achieve certain things. And again, some of the biggest victories in recent years in the United States and in Canada have been driven a lot, like maybe more by on the ground activism. Like, winning the fight for 15 happened because like unions and workers and supporters, like, you know, concerned citizens got together and demanded a $15 minimum wage. And you know, Bernie Sanders, yeah, he's been in Congress for a long time, but Bernie was like an activist before he was an official. And even when Bernie was mayor of Burlington, he was like, remember like Bernie made that TV show where he would go out to like the mall and talk to people in like Vermont about their problems? Like, even when he was a mayor, he was still sort of an activist, like going into the community and like demanding to hear, not demanding, like, you must speak to me, I am Bernie, but like seeking out opinion, right? And I think like you got to do that organizing. Political organizing, union organizing, community organizing, they're all essential to building a broad left. And like, that doesn't mean, because like some people are better at some things. Like, some people are not going to be good at political organizing. It just doesn't float their boat. They're not assigns and checklists and voting, you know, platform person. Whereas there are some people that like structure and they can appreciate, you know, the free-flowing community organizing, but maybe it's not for them. And there are some people that do a lot of union organizing, but the others, you know, they don't, that's not their thing. And it's like, we all have to play that role, right? Of supporting those broad things. Unions, community groups, and political organizing, whether it's in a new party or in the Democrats, depending on the context, is essential. Pork Chop Suffy says, why don't Greens unite with the NDP? They aren't different, and I found they have the same platform. Well, Pork Chop, that's not strictly true. There's a few reasons why they don't unite. One, they're different parties. They've never been together. Party mergers in Canada are very rare. The parties you've seen merged are actually parties that have broken apart in the past. So, for instance, like the UCP in Alberta, the United Conservative Party, is a remerger of the Wild Rose PCs that broke apart about a decade before. And the Federal Conservative Party was a remerger from the Reform and Progressive Conservatives. The breakdown happened in the early 1990s. And so they're different parties with different traditions. There's not a whole lot of overlap in terms of the actors in the party. The Greens are more eco-capitalist. The NDP is more social democratic. At least the Greens under the current leadership. It might change if Dimitri Lascaris becomes leader, but that remains to be seen if he can follow through, or even if he can become leader in the first place. Because I think the party establishment is going to be against him. I think that the Green Party is not strong enough on non-green issues. They're not strong enough on workers' issues. They're not strong enough on social issues. Their party is far too homogeneously white and sort of upper middle class. Now, is there a possibility that with a more eco-socialist Green Party, a merger could happen? Yes. And certainly cooperation between the Greens and the NDP is generally a good thing. It hasn't been perfect. They've done a lot of things wrong, the NDP and the Greens in BC. The Greens have been too anti-worker, the NDP sometimes not strong enough on the environment, but they've built a strong cooperation in BC. So I think more cooperation between the Greens and the NDP, but we're not ready for a merger yet. The policies, the ideologies, they're still too different. They're still too different. And again, just to clarify, the Greens in Canada are not like the Greens in the United States. The Greens in the United States are more similar to the NDP. The Greens in Canada are more similar to like centrist Democrats. Maybe maybe slightly left of center Democrats, but it's like not the Bernie wing. Like that's where they sort of fit. Well, they're not, well, in BC, for instance, the NDP wanted to put forward a motion of card check certification. It's basically Bernie's plan to how to form a union. The way it works in most of Canada and the United States right now is that when you want to form a union, you have to get people from the workplace to sign a card, and then you have a secret ballot vote. And that sounds good, but the time between everyone signing their cards and the vote is always used by the employer to break the union drive through threats, through bribes, through lies. And in both Canada and the United States, there's a representation gap. The amount of workers that want a union is here, and the amount of workers that actually have a union is here. That means there's something stopping workers from getting unions. Not every worker wants unions, but more workers want unions than have unions. And one of the things that's stopping them is the multi-stage certification process. So what Bernie and the NDP support, the NDP supports this all over the country, is that if you get the card signed from 55% of the membership of the workplace, you automatically get a union. That's Bernie's vision. The NDP in BC wanted to do that, but because the NDP doesn't have enough seats to pass any law on their own, they needed the Greens to support them, and the Greens didn't. So the Greens in BC refused to help the NDP make it easier to form unions. And that's just one of the examples. And the BC Greens were one of the reasons why BC's move to the $15 minimum wage was slower than it could have been if the NDP had a majority. Those are just a couple of things, right? That make them a bit different. Craig Adolph says one of the people who ran as a Green federal candidate in Winnipeg a few years ago is now claiming COVID-19 is a hoax and was comparing the city having people give out pamphlets to Nazi Germany. That's the thing with the Greens. I mean, look, every party has kooks. The NDP, we got our kooks sometimes too. Craig knows this. But the Greens in the last election had no fewer than like 9 people say that 9/11 was an inside job, or that that like some or that, and there were more than a few anti-vaxxers among the Green candidates. And it is a party that right now, because it's a young party, it was only created in the 1990s, and it's only really been relevant for the last 10 years or so. And because its entire time of relevance has been under one political leader, it's a party with a very loose identity. And that means it could become a great eco-socialist party, but it could also just remain this weird eco-capitalist party. And it also attracts a lot of people who are just anti-establishment for the sake of being anti-establishment, if that makes any sense. They're not anti-establishment like Bernie, who is anti-establishment because the establishment is part of like that capitalist elite that's anti-worker. And so Bernie is fighting the capitalist establishment from a socialist position. These people are anti-establishment because the establishment is bad. And what's the establishment? It's whatever's bad. So the establishment is big banks. The establishment is the military. The establishment is police. Fine. But the establishment is also public health care in some cases. The establishment is also universities. The establishment is also unionized teachers. And that's where like the Greens can get very eclectic in their viewpoints. Oh yeah, Trudeau as Castro's kids that's more of a PPC thing. That's more of a PPC thing. We have some kooks in the NDP, but we don't have as many as the Greens. I would say the NDP and the Liberals are the least kooky parties. Like the Liberals got a lot of problems, but the Conservatives got their kooks. The PPC is more kook than not. The Greens have a lot of kooks. I would say the NDP and the Liberals don't have as many kooks. The Liberals just have people that are wrong. They're just wrong. But they're not kooks in the same way. It's because they're the most establishment party. Like the Liberal Party is the most establishment party. Are we talking about Passage here, Craig? James, yeah. James Wilt, Rob Russo, they've written for them. Yeah, like Passage has really accumulated a who's who of the Canadian left. David Moskrop's written for them. I've written for them. I shouldn't include myself among them, but Nora Loretto's written for them. Hillary Agro's written for them. Who else has written for them? I don't know. But they've amassed a really, really good source of Canadian writers. Really good source. Approach them if you have a pitch. I can say that 1, they were great to work with. And 2, within invoicing them, they paid me within like a day. So like I don't think you'll have to fight to get your money. Like you do have to from some sources. Yeah, I did see that, Sean. Sean's noting that 50 senators are calling for the CERB to be worked into a UBI. I think that's the right move. It fits more or less what Jagmeet's pushing for. Jagmeet's less like a formal UBI to send every single person a $2,000 check, but more to say that if you need it, apply and you'll get the money, which is the way it should be. But yeah, I mean, this is people like I'm still skeptical of a non-emergency UBI. Because I have to see how it's going to be implemented. Will it be used to say cancel minimum wages? I'm still skeptical. But this is a moment for UBI. Like UBI could become more mainstream now than it's ever been in this moment. For those who don't realize, though, in Canada, to be clear, senators are basically figureheads. The Senate in Canada is required to pass legislation. But the senators are all appointed by prime ministers, and they serve until they hit 75, I believe. So Trudeau's appointed senators. There are still senators appointed from prime ministers long ago, and you sit in the Senate until you turn 75. But you're not elected. You're not regular people don't vote for you. RJ Diggs says, and I'm going to close on this because it is a little bit after 11, but I'm going to close on this. RJ Diggs says, hey, Christo, will you ever run for office in your area in the future? And I'll say what I've always said about this, is that I haven't thought about running, but I've thought about thinking about running. And what I mean by that is that, I haven't ever really sat down and seriously planned, okay, like I'm going to run for city council, or I'm going to run for provincial provincial parliament, or I'm going to run for the federal parliament. I haven't ever done that on a serious level, but I've thought about it in loose terms. How would I do it? What kind of logistics would it entail? When would be a good time to do it for me and most importantly, for Brianna and my son? Like all of these things, like I've thought about in very loose terms. And what I've come to the conclusion is that I'm still open to it, and I could see myself running for the NDP at some point. But it'll depend on a bunch of factors. Like here in Kingston, provincially, we're lucky to have an NDP MPP. I won't be running until that person probably doesn't run again, right? Like that's another thing. And he's a young guy. He's only a year older than me. If he wants to, and he can, and the people of Kingston let him, he could be our MP for 30 years. We don't know. And federally, I mean, the next election, I don't know when it's going to be. I don't know who's going to run. But it's something I would consider doing. It's something I would consider doing, but I haven't made the decision yet. But who knows? Who knows? It might happen. Matt says he found the website for Passage. Yeah, they're really good. It's a really good source. It's good, and they run on a subscription model. You get a couple free reads a month, but I think it only costs like $1. I think it's worth it. I really think it's worth it to read them. I really do. So, guys, I'm going to finish up again. Apologies for the technical issues. It's just my internet just straight out died like 2 or 3 times in the last couple hours. So I'm gonna call Kojiko and see what's up with that at some point. But this was great. For those who are new to the channel, a reminder that we do these every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, to about anywhere from like 10:15 to 11, depending on the night. Usually closer to 10:15, 10:30. And we also sometimes we'll do bonus live streams if like there's a debate or some big event that we'll do a bonus live stream as a post-debate reaction. We did a lot of them during the primaries where we were getting all these debates. When there's federal election debates and things like that, we'll be doing live reaction then as well. One thing to consider is if you want to support the channel, biggest thing you could do is watch the content. YouTube likes when somebody watches a video, clicks on it, watches it all the way through. It's immense help to me if you can, watch the videos, when you have the chance. I know I post frequently. It's hard to absorb them all, but it helps the channel. Another thing you can do is, support the channel through Patreon or becoming a member of the channel here. I know not everyone has the means to do so at the best of times, let alone right now, but that does help the channel. But beyond that, the biggest thing you guys can do is continue to be great supporters of the channel and come to my streams and watch my content and really enjoy it, because that's really important to me. And finally, one thing is most of you are subscribed here, I know, but if you haven't yet, click that little bell, because if you click that bell, you'll be far more likely to get notifications whenever I post a video. So you'll be among the first to get it. So guys, thank you so much. Joseph Mangano says, I would like to see Christo run, but I would also miss the content. Haha. Well, maybe like Michelle Rempel, for those who don't know, I'm not a fan. She's a Canadian Conservative MP, member of Parliament, and she has a YouTube channel, and she makes content. So if I ever became an elected official, I would not abandon my YouTube channel. I'd be still making content. So guys, have a good one, and I will see you, I'll see you next week, but I'm going to see you with new videos pretty much every day. Have a good one, guys.